Prologue. Jack was a 25-year-old philosophy student. Philosophy wasn't always the thing, far from it, actually. It wasn't even a first choice. He had big aspirations. He wanted to be either a tech genius or an influential entrepreneur. But fate had a different course set for him. His grandfather was a very rich old man, with a warped sense of humor. His will stipulated a strange condition: if Jack wanted to inherit his money, he had to graduate with a degree in philosophy. So, he got into being a philosophy student, and he went out to read Plato, Nietzsche, and Kant, although, for his part, he found these people as dry as dust. Years ticked by in those classrooms, where his peers spoke in riddles, debating the very essence of existence and what it meant to exist. He would often stare at the blackboard blankly, wrestling with why he was there at all. All his intense studying eluded enlightenment, and he found no deeper purpose. He felt stuck, trapped in a monotonous life. The promise of wealth didn't excite him anymore, it was like a distant mirage. He wanted something more: excitement, adventure, or at least a sense of meaning. But life had other ideas. The most thrilling part of Jack's day was choosing which coffee shop to visit. Day after day, he caught himself entangled in a monotonous routine, somehow feeling that he was being slowly strangled by the heavy drudgery of his life. It was another very long, boring day with meaningless philosophical debates. Jack needed to leave this sort of life he was stuck within: lectures, empty speeches, and constant waiting for the inheritance from his grandfather. He merely felt that urge for something in that impulsive flash of decision, as something that could perhaps garnish his life a little bit, if only that night. Into the red light district of the city he went. It was a place he'd never been to, never even stepping foot in, but one he'd heard about. Silently, he wandered through streets dimly lit with neon lights that buzzed and flickered like distant stars. Around him, shady characters and alluring places where people looked to forget the drabness of daily routine or enjoy themselves. Jack felt a new kind of excitement. Indeed, it was a thrill he had never, ever experienced before. He entered a dingy and run-down brothel that hadn't been swept in over 40 years. The smell of alcohol, sweat, and cheap perfume hung heavy in the air. Jack, who was already half drunk, found himself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Here he was, a philosophy student, someone who debated the essence of life and the existence of the soul, paying for a night with a prostitute. It was almost poetic, in a twisted way. The woman with him was equally uninterested in her job. They mumbled a few of the exceedingly awkward words before he settled onto the stained mattress. Nervous, unsure of what to say or do, he attempted to ease himself, to relax into the experience, but his stomach had other plans. Jack felt churning in his stomach. Initially, he dismissed it as the beer he'd guzzled earlier. Still, the churning became sharper, cutting him up inside. Before he could even react, his body turned on him. He emitted a loud, wet fart, followed almost at once by a wave of nausea. He tried to fight it off, but it was too late. He leaned over and threw up all over the poor woman. For an instant, they were totally silent. Jack caught the combination of repulsion and shock on her face, but nothing would come out of his mouth to apologize. His vision blurred, his head whirled about him, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. His body slumped, hitting the mattress. The last sound he was aware of was the woman screaming for help and another big fart. His last thoughts were, so this is the grand meaning of life, farting into oblivion. And that was it for Jack. Not exactly a heroic death, nor a tragic one. It was the kind of death that would make one laugh, a dark punchline to a joke: his life. Alone in a dingy brothel, from what seemed to be a combination of alcohol poisoning and choking on his own vomit. It was, as he would have called it, a meaningless death, fitting for someone who had spent his life pondering the meaning of existence. Darkness enveloped Jack, pulling him into the abyss. He felt nothing, saw nothing. It was as if time had stopped. No aching, no light, no sound, just an endless emptiness. If he had been conscious, he might well have thought this the afterlife he had so fiercely debated in his classes of philosophy, a place of pure nothingness. Then something happened. He was floating in this warm thick liquid, and he could not open his eyes, not even move his limbs. He did not feel that his body belonged to him anymore. He tried to remember everything. The brothel, the vomiting, the darkness, it all came back as flashes. He should have died. He was dead. Before he could make anything of it, he heard voices. Muffled, distant voices. They were speaking, but he did not understand the words. Yet the sounds were somehow comforting, like listening to a gentle hum through a thick wall. He tried to open his eyes to see where he was, but his body felt weak and unresponsive to the control of his mind. Something in him flowed out, and he was drawn from the warm liquid. He sucked in the air as he felt his lungs fill up. He uttered a scream. It was a shriek of piercing cry. He felt small, minuscule, like he had shrunk himself to the size of an oat. It didn't make any sense. His vision remained cloudy. As his eyes adjusted, he saw faces. They were huge and towered over him. He felt a firm grip on his body, but when looking down realized he was in the hands of a woman wearing a white coat. She was smiling, tears in her eyes. Another face came into view, a man with dark hair and pure bliss written all over him. "It's a boy," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Stark." Everything in Jack's brain was running like a racehorse in a sprinting competition. Mr. Stark. He knew that name, but it couldn't be. He tried to comprehend what was happening, but the reality hit him like a truck. Stark. Baby. Shit. He wasn't just any baby. He was Tony Stark, the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist from the Marvel Universe. He was reborn, not as himself but as a baby version of one of the most iconic characters in fiction. Thoughts were swirling in his head in confusion, disbelief, and weird excitement. He died in a most absurd way, only to be reborn as Tony Stark. What a dream, ha ha ha, but everything felt so real, the chill of the air, the sound of voices, the brightness of the lights. If this was a dream, it was one hell of a vivid one. He felt himself being handed over to a woman. Her face was the first clear image he saw. She was beautiful, with soft features and a loving gaze. This must be Maria Stark, Tony's mother. She held him close, smiling down at him with pure adoration. "Hello, my little heart," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth. The man beside her, Howard Stark, looked at him with pride. "He's perfect," Howard said, gently touching his tiny hand. Jack, or rather, Tony, stared up at them. He was still trying to get his head wrapped around everything that was going on. He had all of Jack's memories, his thoughts, his personality, but he was now in the body of Tony Stark, a baby at that. This was the Marvel Universe, a world full of superheroes, villains, and epic battles. He was no longer that purposeless philosophy student named Jack, he was soon to be Tony Stark, the future Iron Man. A genius billionaire playboy philanthropist. Yeah, I could get used to this. Alright, time to live a life free of regrets and full of fun. Wait, is Thanos still a thing? Remember, technology is advanced in this reality. Read carefully. 1. Harem. Non-harem lovers greater than don't read and cry. 2. As mentioned in the synopsis, greater than MC will do anything for survival. 3. Be warned, I will be focusing on the ground, Earth-level villains for the first half before moving on to cosmic threats. 4. No system. 5. Slow burn. Yeah, there will be suits and serum and all that. 6. Please, a request to some of you readers greater than, don't spam comments with a harem list on every chapter. I know some of you do that. 7. How big is this FF? As usual, you can expect 200 chapters. After that, it will depend on Power Stones and readers. 8. Troll reviews will be deleted. Some of Goody Shoe's non-harem lovers love to spam fake reviews just because they didn't get a non-harem story. To them, greater than, get the fuck out of here. 9. This is a new FF, not connected with the ongoing one. 10. Technological advance world. 11. I use Grammarly to fix the grammar. So you can expect good grammar with minimal mistakes. Let me know if you find typos or any mistakes, I'll fix them. Support link. www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 20 advanced chapters. 60 comments, 0 vote. A genius. 4 years later, the mansion was silent except for the metronomic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in one corner and the gentle thrum of machines working from Howard Stark's workshop. In the big library, a little boy sat in a leather armchair with a book nearly as big as he was in his lap. He turned the page, focused solely. Jack, no, Tony, had come a long way since that surreal day when he first realized his new reality. He wasn't the type to wallow in existential crises or waste time asking why or how this happened. Instead, he accepted it with surprising ease, figuring he'd been handed a second chance and might as well make the most of it. Still, adapting wasn't easy. At first, his infant body was frustratingly weak and slow. Everything, sitting up, walking, even talking, required grueling effort. But once he mastered his tiny limbs and started speaking, things became interesting. Maria and Howard Stark were often busy, but their affection for him was genuine. Maria, in particular, doted on him, while Howard offered the kind of distracted yet proud admiration you'd expect from a genius with limited parenting skills. It was Howard's library, however, that became Tony's sanctuary. As Jack, he'd never been a prodigy, but here, something about this new brain was different. He discovered it by accident, one lazy afternoon when he'd been aimlessly wandering the mansion. Stumbling into the library, he was struck by its sheer size. Shelves upon shelves of books lined the walls, filled with titles that screamed, high IQ only, advanced theoretical physics, mechanics of flight, quantum field theory. He didn't expect to understand any of it. Philosophy had been his thing, though not by choice, and his knowledge of science or engineering had been average at best. But curiosity led him to crack open a book, and as he read, the words made sense in a way they never had before. Concepts he vaguely remembered as impossible hurdles in school, like thermodynamics and electromagnetism, suddenly felt obvious. At first, he thought it was a fluke, but the more he read, the clearer it became. His mind was wired differently now. Ideas clicked into place with almost mechanical precision, each piece of information slotting neatly into a growing framework of understanding. By the time he reached the third chapter of Introduction to Advanced Robotics, he wasn't just reading, he was visualizing, planning, innovating. His small hands turned the page with a calmness that belied his racing thoughts. So, if I run current through a coil and suspend it in a magnetic field, right? That's how you get rotational motion, he muttered under his breath. His voice still carried the high-pitched timbre of a child, but his tone was all business. Tony. The voice startled him. He looked up to see Maria standing in the doorway, smiling softly. Yes, Mom, he asked, closing the book with a sheepish grin. She chuckled, walking over to him. Are you reading again? You spend more time in here than your father does in his workshop. She tousled his hair gently. It's fun, he said honestly. I like figuring things out. Maria crouched beside him, her eyes soft but searching. You're such a curious little boy. Just promise me one thing, Tony. What's that? Don't just sit all day reading, try to play some games or maybe do some running around in the garden, she said softly, smoothing a strand of hair from his forehead. You have all the time in the world to read. For now, just be a kid, okay? I don't want you to drown in tons of work all the time, like you dad. He nodded, but inwardly he knew he couldn't stop. Not now, not when his mind felt like a furnace, constantly forging new ideas, new possibilities. Being just a kid wasn't an option, he had too much to learn, too much to do. Later that evening, Tony sat at the dinner table with his parents. His father was unusually animated, talking about his latest project for Stark Industries. It's a revolutionary propulsion system, Howard was saying, gesturing with his fork. If we can perfect it, it'll change aviation as we know it. Tony leaned forward, his small face scrunched in thought. What kind of propulsion? Jet, rocket, or something else entirely? Howard blinked, surprised. That's pretty specific for a 4-year-old. Tony shrugged. I read about it in your library. Jets use combustion to generate thrust, but rockets carry their own oxidizers, so they're better for space travel. Maria laughed lightly. Howard, you've created a monster. Howard stared at his son for a long moment before breaking into a smile. You're going to give me a run for my money, aren't you, kid? Tony smirked. Oh, you have no idea. The next day, Tony decided to put theory into practice. He snuck into the workshop while Howard was out, marveling at the array of tools and materials. Everything he needed was here: wires, soldering kits, scraps of metal. He started small. Using what he'd learned from the library, he rigged a simple circuit, then moved on to building a crude motor. By the end of the week, he had created a working model of a miniature electric car. It wasn't perfect, its movements were somewhat slow and little heavy on the back, but it worked. As he saw the little car splutter into action, Tony felt a sense of satisfaction. That was just the beginning. Howard Stark was not a man to be easily surprised, but Tony Stark, his 4-year-old son, was a rare exception. Howard had always been proud of his ability to recognize genius. He had seen it in himself, in his colleagues, and now, unmistakably, in his son. The electric car model had been the tipping point. Howard had found it on his workbench one evening, neatly assembled from scraps. It wasn't perfect, but the fact that a child had built it at all was staggering. Yet, Howard said nothing. He merely stood there, holding the tiny car, feeling a strange mix of pride and dread. He knew firsthand the cost of brilliance. His own intellect had brought him wealth, fame, and success, but it had also brought enemies, isolation, and endless pressure. Howard had long feared that his son might inherit this burden. Seeing Tony's creations only confirmed it. Howard resolved not to intervene, at least not yet. He'd keep an eye on Tony, guiding him subtly when needed, but for now, he would let his son enjoy the innocence of childhood. The following week, Tony wandered into Howard's workshop again. It was filled with half-finished projects, blueprints, and prototypes, as usual. Despite its cluttered appearance, everything had its place. Howard placed them according to their importance. It was here that Tony found it. A blackboard covered in a chalk diagram. The structure was unfamiliar yet intriguing, a lattice of concentric rings and interwoven lines that seemed to hum with potential even in its incomplete state. Next to the board, a stack of notes lay scattered across the desk, covered in Howard's precise handwriting. Tony climbed onto the chair and grabbed the notes, his small hands carefully flipping the pages. It didn't take long for him to realize what he was looking at, an early concept for what would one day be known as the arc reactor. His heart raced. The notes detailed Howard's vision for a compact, self-sustaining energy source, free of fossil fuels and capable of revolutionizing the world. But they also highlighted the flaws, instabilities in the energy output, inefficiencies in the containment field, and equations that didn't quite add up. Tony couldn't help but smile. He wasn't just reading, he was understanding. His mind worked through the equations like a knife slicing through butter, and ideas sprang to life with startling clarity. He saw where Howard had gone wrong, where the calculations needed tweaking, and even how the design could be improved. "Dad, you're good," Tony muttered to himself, "but you're overcomplicating things." He grabbed his notebook and began sketching. His small fingers moved with the precision of someone far older, drawing a revised design based on Howard's notes and his own memories from his past life. The movies and comics about Iron Man had given him enough of a blueprint to work with, and his new intellect filled in the gaps. For hours, Tony worked in silence, his head bent over his notebook. He didn't just recreate the arc reactor, he refined it. He even simplified the magnetic confinement field equations, adjusted the old energy core dimensions for better energy stability in a new palladium-based core, and even added a failsafe against possible overload. At the end of it, the notebook was full of diagrams, equations, and annotations. It was not a perfect design. He did not have access to all the materials or tools with which to build such a functioning reactor, but it was a solid foundation. Tony sat back in his chair, gazing at his creation. A satisfied shiver rolled over him. This was more than the school science fair or childish doodle, and this was real, something to change the world. And he wasn't even 5 years old yet. Unbeknownst to Tony, Howard had been watching. He'd come into the workshop earlier, intending to grab a file, only to find his son engrossed in the blackboard and the notes. At first, Howard was alarmed. Those designs weren't meant for a child's eyes, but then he saw the way Tony worked. Howard stayed hidden, watching from the shadows as his son corrected equations and sketched new designs with a focus and precision that were almost frightening. When Tony finally left the workshop, clutching his notebook, Howard stepped out of the shadows. He approached the blackboard, studying the additions Tony had made. To his astonishment, they were correct. Not just correct, but better than his own calculations. "Ha ha ha," he laughed, shaking his head. "Tony, what am I going to do with you?" Howard knew, at that moment, that he wouldn't be able to hold his son back. The genius he saw in Tony had already begun to show, and it was only a matter of time before it would manifest itself in bolder, more ambitious projects. "You might as well join me, kid," Howard murmured. But Howard also knew the world wouldn't let brilliance like that go unnoticed. If Tony continued down this path, he would face challenges and dangers Howard wasn't sure he was ready for. For now, Howard decided, he'd let Tony have his moment. He wouldn't stifle his son's creativity, but he would keep a close eye on him, guiding him subtly and shielding him from the harsh realities of the world. God help me, Howard murmured, running a hand through his hair. This kid's going to outdo me before he's even a teenager. -- Support link. www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 19 advanced chapters. 30 comments 0 vote. Complicated world. The sun rays fell through the massive oak trees, casting rays across the ground. The rustling of leaves filled the space with soft sounds, as well as the occasional sound of a bird singing. It was one of those ideal, spring early summer days when everything looked and felt vibrant with color and hope. Tony, now 5 years old, held tightly to Maria's hand as they walked along a winding path that snaked through the estate gardens. His little legs pumped with a force that defied the constant busy thoughts in his young brain. Maria in a plain but beautiful white sundress wore a smile as she scanned the ground to her son. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it, Tony?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic. Tony glanced up at her, his mind briefly pulling away from the intricate blueprints he'd been mentally working on since breakfast. "Yeah, Mom, it's okay," he said, but his demeanor hinted at his mind not being entirely in the present. Maria chuckled. "You're always thinking, aren't you? Even when we're supposed to be enjoying a walk." He shrugged, a playful grin spreading across his face. "Can't help it. There's just so much to figure out." "Well, maybe today, you can figure out how to climb a tree or skip a stone," she suggested, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Tony laughed. "Climbing trees is inefficient. The risk-to-reward ratio doesn't make sense unless I'm building a treehouse." She stopped walking, bending down to meet his gaze. "Tony, you're an amazing little boy. But you don't always have to be so serious. Life is about more than equations and machines. Sometimes, it's about moments like this, just walking, talking, and enjoying the sunshine." Her words sank in, and for a moment, Tony felt a pang of guilt. He adored his mother, and he knew she worried about him. She always encouraged him to play, to make friends, to be a child. But it wasn't that simple. His mind simply didn't slow down. Each moment of quiet was a chance to think, to construct, or to elevate. He just couldn't be the little kid she wanted him to be with so much in the line. To survive and live a long life, he had to continue to improve himself, or else, how would he face the countless villains in this world? "I'll give it a shot," he said quietly, a tiny hand giving hers a gentle squeeze. Maria grinned and stood straight, walking towards a miniature pond in the center of the garden. They settled on a wooden bench and viewed the water, the soft waves picking apart the sills of light. As they sat in silence, Tony noticed a duck waddling toward the pond, followed by a trail of fluffy ducklings. Although he wanted to think about the algorithm of his first AI and blueprints of the arc reactor, he noticed her mother's worried expression, hiding behind the mask of a happy face, so, he decided to act and take it slow. He pointed excitedly. "Look, Mom, they're like a little family." Maria's heart swelled at his enthusiasm. "They are, aren't they? The mother duck is training her ducklings to swim and survive. She's their guide." Tony stared closely at the scene and paid attention to every single element. "They don't have to read books or build machines. They just know what to do. That's the beauty of nature," Maria said. "Sometimes, the simplest things are the most extraordinary." Tony smiled, a moment of quiet fell upon him. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to just be. The ducks, the sunlight, his mother's presence, it was enough. When some time passed, Maria got up and stretched out her hand. "Come on, let's head back. Your father's probably wondering where we've disappeared to." Tony took her hand, his heart lighter than it had been in days. As they walked back toward the mansion, he glanced up at her and said, "Thanks, Mom. It was nice." Maria's smile was radiant. "Always, my little heart. Always." Back at the house, Howard peered out from his study, as they walked back up the walk. A small smile tugged at his lips as he saw Tony laughing at something Maria said. For all his brilliance, for all his potential, Tony was still a child who needed moments like this. Howard looked over at his workbench, open on which Tony's notebook rested. His son's revised arc reactor design stared back at him. It was a much more advanced version than the concept one. "Maria's right," Howard muttered to himself. "He deserves to be a kid for as long as he can. Because one day, the world's going to demand more from him than it should." And for now, Howard resolved, they would protect him from that day for as long as they could. Howard sat in his study, sipping a glass of scotch as the soft knock on the door drew his attention. Maria stepped inside, her expression calm but thoughtful. She closed the door behind her and crossed the room, her white dress almost glowing in the dim light. "Tony's asleep," she said softly, sitting down across from him. He nodded, setting his glass down on the desk. "Good. The boy needs his rest. His mind's always running at full speed. Just like his old man." Maria smiled faintly. "He's so much like you. Always thinking, always creating." "But Howard," she paused, searching for the right words. "I worry about him." Howard leaned back in his chair, his brows furrowing. "Worry? About what? The kid's a genius, Maria. Smarter than half the scientists I've got on payroll. What's there to worry about?" She folded her hands in her lap. "It's his childhood. He's so far ahead of everyone else his age. School doesn't challenge him. It frustrates him. He doesn't fit in with the other kids. He's lonely, Howard." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I know. I've seen it too. He's bored out of his mind in that classroom. He doesn't need to learn the alphabet when he's already building circuits." "Exactly," she said. "So what do we do? Keeping him in school feels wrong. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But if we take him out, what's the alternative?" Howard tapped his fingers on the desk, his mind working. "We need to give him what he needs. Something tailored to him. Private tutors, the best in the world. People who can actually keep up with him. Teach him things that matter, science, engineering, programming. Let him stretch his wings." Maria tilted her head, considering his words. "Do you think that's what's best for him? I mean, not just his mind, but his heart. He's still a little boy, Howard. He needs more than academics. He needs to know how to connect with people, to have friends." He frowned, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I'm not saying we lock him in a lab, Maria. He's a Stark. He'll have opportunities most kids only dream about. But we can't hold him back just to keep him normal. That'd be a waste of who he is. The world's going to need his brilliance someday." Maria reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. "I just want him to be happy, Howard. Not just successful, happy." His expression softened. Howard squeezed her hand gently. "I want that too. Maybe we find a balance. The tutors can push him academically, but we make sure he gets time to just be a kid too. Sports, hobbies, whatever he wants. And we'll keep him close. No boarding schools or sending him off to some fancy institute. He needs us." Maria nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "I think that could work. But we have to agree, Howard. No matter how brilliant he is, he's still our son first. His happiness comes before anything else. Don't worry. We'll do right by him, Maria. Together," he said. 2 years later, at 7 years old, Tony Stark had done something no one expected from a child. He had built a fully functional V8 motorbike engine. The workshop in the corner of the Stark estate had become his sanctuary. The hum of machinery and the scent of oil were more comforting than the silence in the large house. The engine roared to life on a test stand. Tony's lips curled into a smile as he adjusted the throttle, the sound filling the room. It was perfect, efficient, powerful, and better than anything he'd seen in the magazines he read late at night. "Not bad," he muttered to himself, wiping grease from his hands. "Not bad at all." But as proud as he felt about his creation, there was an ache in his chest he couldn't ignore. His parents weren't there to see it. Howard Stark had grown busier with each passing day. Between running Stark Industries, taking on new projects for S.H.I.E.L.D., and acting as a defense contractor for the government, his time at home was scarce. When he was home, he was tired, stressed, and drinking more than ever. Tony noticed it all. His father's once sharp focus seemed to waver, and his temper flared at the smallest mistakes. It hurt, but Tony understood. He knew Howard carried the weight of a demanding world. Tony had seen glimpses of this in the comics and movies from his past life. He already knew how hard it was for Howard to balance everything. Maria tried her best to keep the family together. She still smiled and offered kind words, but even Tony could see the worry in her eyes. She spent her time organizing charity events and running the household, but she seemed lonelier now, too. Tony often worked late in his workshop. The machines didn't yell at him or tell him to stop dreaming. They didn't ask why he wasn't acting like a normal 7-year-old. Here, he could be himself. One evening, Tony was sketching blueprints for a small robotic arm when the door to the workshop creaked open. Maria stepped inside, a soft smile on her face. "Still working?" she asked, brushing her hands against her skirt. Tony nodded, not looking up. "Almost done. Just need to tweak the rotation mechanism." She walked over and sat on a stool beside him. "You know, I miss seeing you around the house." He paused, his pencil hovering over the paper. "I miss you too, Mom. But, it's quieter here." Maria's smile faltered. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Tony, you know we love you, right? Even when your father and I are busy." Tony turned to her, his small face serious beyond his years. "I know, Mom, it's okay. I understand. Dad's trying to save the world, and you're always helping people. I get it." Her heart ached at his words. "But you're our world, Tony. Don't forget that." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, Maria kissed his forehead and stood. "Come inside soon, okay? It's late." "I will," Tony said softly, watching as she left. In the main house, Howard sat in his study, a glass of scotch in his hand. He stared at a stack of papers on his desk, but his mind wasn't on work. He thought about Tony, about how distant their relationship had become. "I need to do better," he whispered to himself. But the words felt hollow, lost in the haze of stress and alcohol. Tony, back in the workshop, stared at the blueprints on his desk. He wasn't angry at his father. He wasn't even sad. He had already decided that if the world was too big and complicated for his parents to keep up, he'd just figure out a way to make it better himself. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 18 advanced chapters, no double billing. The next chapter will be released on Wednesday. Excalibur_X creators thoughts. 32 comments, 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. Excalibur_XC. Download app now. Creating AI. Tony sat in the workshop late at night, his secret notebook open before him. The pages were full of sketches hastily hatched during short lapses in attention, lists carefully tabulated, and names written in neat, precise letters. It was Alexander Pierce, Arnim Zola, and many more names stared back up at him, reminded of the villains he knew from the comics and movies of his past life. The weight of the task before him pressed heavily on his small shoulders. He was just 7 years old, yet the responsibility of saving his family and dismantling an organization of that secretive nature felt both terrifying and exhilarating. He clutched the pencil tightly and began writing a new idea that had been circulating in his mind all day. "If I can't stop them, no one will," he said to himself, his voice steady despite the fear that persisted at the edges of his thoughts. Tony understood he couldn't rely on his father. Howard was brilliant, but between his responsibilities as the head of Stark Industries, his work for S.H.I.E.L.D., and his growing dependence on alcohol, Howard was far too distracted. If anything, Howard might even dismiss his concerns as childish fantasy. And what was he even supposed to say? He couldn't possibly reveal the secret of his rebirth. No, this was something Tony would have to handle on his own. Tony flipped to a blank page in his notebook, heading at the plan. The first step, he decided, was to create a tool that could do what he couldn't. A tool that wouldn't tire, wouldn't falter, and wouldn't doubt him. An artificial intelligence, far beyond anything Howard had ever dreamed of. If Tony could control technology, if he could command the flow of information on the internet, he could expose Hydra's spies with ease. But first, he needed to start small. His own computer. Howard's unfinished projects and spare parts, forgotten and collecting dust in the estate's storage areas, would provide the perfect raw materials. Over the next few weeks, Tony scavenged every component he could find: circuit boards, processors, cooling fans, and even wires from decommissioned prototypes. He carefully avoided anything Howard might miss, not wanting to raise suspicion. His nights were spent assembling these parts in the workshop, the space becoming his sanctuary. The air smelled of oil and solder from his previous project, and the rhythmic hum of machines was his lullaby. His fingers worked with a precision that belied his age, connecting wires and testing circuits with the determination of someone much older. It took weeks of trial and error, but finally Tony had made a working computer. Not much to look at, It was an odd assortment of mismatched components housed in a makeshift case. It worked. And the moment it powered on, with its screen glowing in life, Tony's heart swelled with pride. Okay, he muttered to himself, settling back in his chair. One step down, a million to go. The computer was basic, with limited processing power and memory, but it was his. More importantly, it was the foundation for his real project, the AI. Tony named it Project Hermes. Hermes, the Greek messenger god, felt like a fitting namesake for what he envisioned, a system capable of transmitting and interpreting information at lightning speed. His life over the next 6 months became a careful balancing act between his formal education, his growing knowledge, and his secret project. Mornings were spent with his tutors, breezing through lessons on math, science, and engineering. These subjects were almost too easy for him, so he often used the time to ask more advanced questions, subtly steering his tutors toward topics that would help him with Project Hermes. Mr. Richards, Tony said one morning, interrupting his physics tutor. How does quantum entanglement work in practical applications? Can it be used for data transfer? The older man blinked, startled by the advanced question. Well, Tony, that's a complicated field. But, in theory, yes, it could revolutionize communication. Tony nodded, filing the information away for later. Afternoons were for self-study. He devoured books on coding, electrical engineering, cryptography, and network systems. Many of these he borrowed from Howard's private collection, sneaking into his father's study late at night to retrieve them. He also began experimenting with programming languages, teaching himself basic and assembly code. Evenings belonged to Project Hermes. In the quiet solitude of the workshop, Tony worked tirelessly on the AI. He started with basic algorithms, teaching the system to recognize patterns and learn from data inputs. Slowly, it began to respond to voice commands, though its responses were clunky and limited at first. His makeshift computer struggled to handle the demands of his AI algorithms. To overcome this, he carefully borrowed more advanced components from Howard's labs, always ensuring he left everything exactly as he found it. While Tony was incredibly intelligent, there were still concepts he didn't fully understand. When he encountered these roadblocks, he turned to his hidden notebook, sketching out ideas and solutions until he found a way forward. Life at home was becoming increasingly difficult. Howard's temper flared more often, and his drinking worsened. Maria did her best to keep the peace, but even her warmth couldn't shield Tony from the tension that filled the house. And to make things worse, he had to be extra careful to make sure his dad didn't suspect him of borrowing his instruments without permission. By the end of 6 months, he had made remarkable progress. Project Hermes was no longer just an idea, it was a functioning AI. The system could analyze simple data sets, recognize speech, and even simulate basic hacking scenarios in a controlled environment. One night, as Tony sat in his workshop, he decided to test the AI's voice interface. Hermes, are you online? Tony asked, leaning forward in anticipation. A soft, robotic voice crackled through the speakers. System online, awaiting input. Tony grinned. What's 2 plus 2? 4. What's the square root of 16? 4. What's my name? Tony Stark. He laughed, a rare moment of joy in an otherwise challenging time. Hermes was still rudimentary, but it was a start. With time, Tony knew he could expand its capabilities. Now that Hermes was operational, Tony shifted his focus to the next phase of his plan, integrating the AI with real-world systems. To do this, he needed access to more advanced hardware and, eventually, the internet. He began devising ways to gain access to Howard's resources without drawing attention. One evening, Tony sat in his workshop, flipping through his notebook. His handwriting filled every page, the once blank paper now a maze of ideas and strategies. Phase 2, he muttered. Expand Hermes. Test its hacking capabilities. Start small, but aim big. The stakes had never been higher, but Tony's resolve never wavered. If he was going to defend his family and destroy Hydra, he needed to be a patient man. Every move had to be calculated. Despite his busy schedule, Tony occasionally allowed himself moments of reflection. He thought about his parents, Maria's gentle kindness and Howard's fleeting moments of pride. He worked harder for them, even as their presence in his life grew more distant. One night, Maria stopped by the workshop while Tony was working. She beheld him for a moment, Her heart hurt to see her young son so intent on what he was doing, so determined. "Tony," she said softly, stepping into the room. He looked up, startled. "Mom, I didn't hear you." She smiled, walking over to him. "You've been in here all day. It's late, sweetheart, come inside." "I'm almost done," Tony said, his voice quiet but firm. Maria put a hand on his shoulder. "I know you love your projects, but don't forget to take care of yourself too. You are still just a little boy, Tony. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Tony hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, Mom, I'll come in soon." As Maria left, Tony stared at the door, his chest constricted. He loved his mother so much that he almost hated keeping secrets from her. But this time he could not stop. Not now, when everything was already set in motion. 2 years later. 2 years had passed since Tony Stark first booted up Project Hermes. Time had only sharpened his skills and expanded his ambitions. Now 9 years old, Tony had access to a more powerful machine, thanks to his mother. The sleek new computer she had gifted him for his birthday was light years ahead of his original cobbled-together creation, but Tony, being Tony, had no intention of using it as it came out of the box. Maria smiled warmly as she handed Tony the wrapped box, the twinkle in her eyes showing her excitement. "Happy birthday, Tony. I figured it was time you had a proper computer." Tony tore through the wrapping paper with the enthusiasm of a child, but his excitement wasn't for the computer itself, it was for the potential it held. Under the silver case and polished glass was a machine just waiting to be taken apart and upgraded, according to his will. With his knowledge and parts from his dad's storage, upgrading the machine would be fun. He thought. "It's awesome, Mom," he said, giving her a tight hug. "Thank you." Maria ruffled his hair, her smile growing. "Just don't forget to spend some time outside too, okay? A computer can't replace the real world." Tony chuckled, nodding. "I'll try." As soon as she left the room, he began to work. Over the next few days, Tony carefully upgraded the computer, dismantling it piece by piece and replacing components with custom-built parts scavenged from his father's old projects. He increased its processing power, expanded its memory, and integrated a cooling system that would allow it to run complex algorithms without overheating. "Now, this is what I'm talking about," Tony muttered to himself as he reassembled the machine. "This is Hermes' new brain." With the enhanced hardware, Project Hermes leapt forward in functionality. Tony had spent the last 2 years refining the AI's algorithms, teaching it to process and analyze data at a pace that would make even seasoned engineers jealous. Now, with the new computer's power, Hermes became smarter, faster, and far more capable. "Hermes, run Diagnostic Protocol Alpha," Tony said one night, leaning back in his chair as the computer's screen came to life. Protocol Alpha initiated. Diagnostic report in progress, the AI responded, its voice now smoother and more human-like. Tony watched as lines of code streamed across the screen, detailing Hermes' capabilities. The AI could now sift through massive datasets in seconds, identifying patterns and anomalies with pinpoint accuracy. While Tony had been cautious about connecting Hermes to the internet, he had created a secure virtual environment for testing its hacking capabilities. Within this sandbox, Hermes had successfully breached simulated firewalls, cracked encrypted files, and even mimicked basic social engineering techniques. Gone were the days of clunky, robotic responses. Hermes now understood natural language, allowing Tony to hold seamless conversations with the AI. Tony pushed Hermes further each day, setting increasingly complex challenges to test the AI's limits. One night, he tasked it with analyzing encrypted data he had borrowed from one of Howard's research files. "Decrypt this file and summarize its contents," Tony instructed. "Decryption in progress. Estimated time, 3 minutes, Hermes replied. Tony tapped his fingers on the desk, impressed. The file was heavily encrypted, but Hermes had no trouble breaking it down. When the AI finally displayed the decrypted data, Tony couldn't help but grin. It was a blueprint for a new type of reactor, a design Howard had been keeping under wraps. Not bad, Hermes. Not bad at all. While Hermes was growing more powerful by the day, Tony knew it wasn't enough to keep the AI confined to his workshop. If he wanted to take down Hydra, he needed Hermes to interact with the real world. But that came with risks. The moment Hermes touched the internet, it would leave a digital footprint that could attract unwanted attention. Well, time to create a cloaking protocol and upgrade the codes. He cracked his fingers. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 18 advanced chapters, no double billing. 45 comments, 0 vote. One step at a time. The workshop was eerily silent, with only the power supply of the computer making a bit of a noise today. The room was discarded wires and half-empty cups of coffee. Well, considering his age, he tried his best to keep the caffeine to a certain limit, and there was a notebook spread open on the workbench. Its pages were crammed with lines of equations, hastily scratched out ideas, and fragmented notes. On top of one page, underlined thrice, are the words, cloaking algorithm, and security protocols. Tony leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Come on, Hermes, he muttered, his voice laced with exhaustion. We've got this. We just need to figure out how to hide you from, well, everyone. It sounded simple in theory, but in practice, it was anything but easy. Every attempt at creating a cloaking algorithm had ended in failure. The hardware was primitive compared to what Tony envisioned, and the software, though groundbreaking for the time, was rudimentary by the standards he knew were possible. The first time he'd tried running a cloaking protocol, it had nearly fried Hermes' circuits. System error, the AI had crackled, its voice strained and distorted. Critical failure in cloaking protocol. Restarting. Tony had stared at the screen, his frustration boiling over as the AI rebooted. Damn it, he'd shouted, slamming his small fist onto the desk. Oh, he rubbed his hand and looked back at the door. Gotta keep it down. Failure was part of the process, he understood that. But the sting of it still gnawed at him. Despite his prodigious intellect, he was just a child trying to build something that didn't exist yet, couldn't exist yet. Tony's days bled into nights, an endless cycle of research and experimentation. He devoured books on cryptography, machine learning, and systems security, pulling dusty books from the Stark Estate's library and uncovering hidden notes in his father's private study. But the knowledge he sought didn't exist. The theories were outdated, and the hardware too primitive. Well, if it doesn't exist, I'll simply create one. Oh, this will be fun. He mumbled to himself with a smile. Late one evening, Tony slumped over his notebook, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark circles under his eyes. The page in front of him was filled with a list of problems. Hermes lacks real-time adaptability. Cloaking protocol crashes under data load. Failsafe design incomplete. Hermes cannot self-destruct securely. Underneath, in bold letters, he'd scrawled a single word, solutions. He tapped the pencil on the notebook. He was exhausted, but couldn't keep himself from thinking. He could feel the weight of what he was trying to achieve pressing down on him. But it was something he began to enjoy. It was his own choice in this life, no one told him to work that hard or do anything. If he wanted, he could have enjoyed a normal childhood, but he wanted to achieve something. He wanted to do what he wanted. So, he continued on that path. But no matter what path one takes, failure and success are a part of it. One might stop after facing hard failures, but not Tony. Maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew, he murmured. But giving up wasn't an option. He couldn't stop, not when the stakes were so high. He had to make Hermes work, not just for the satisfaction of creating something extraordinary but to protect his family and dismantle Hydra's influence. Over the next few weeks, Tony adjusted his approach. He broke his grand vision into smaller, more manageable steps. Refine Hermes' basic systems for stability and adaptability. Develop encryption protocols from scratch, combining existing techniques with new ideas. Test small masking protocols to simulate cloaking on a smaller scale. The progress was slow and often frustrating. One night, after countless failed attempts, Tony tested a basic masking protocol designed to reduce Hermes' visibility within a local network. Hermes, execute protocol BETA3, he instructed, his voice tight with anticipation. Executing, the AI responded. The seconds dragged like hours as Tony watched lines of code scroll across the screen. Finally, Hermes' voice broke the tense silence. Protocol BETA3 executed successfully. Data visibility, 23% reduction. A grin spread across Tony's face. It wasn't a full cloaking algorithm, not yet, but it was progress. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. Not bad. He mumbled. He shut down the workshop for the night and went to his room. He lay on the bed, staring at his notebook. His failures were glaring, written in bold, messy scrawls across the pages. But alongside them were ideas, small victories and glimpses of what could be. He flipped to a blank page and wrote a single line at the top. The greatest failures pave the way for the greatest successes. For the first time in a long while, Tony allowed himself to feel proud. He wasn't there yet, but he was getting closer. 2 days later, Tony sat slumped in his chair, his head resting on the workbench. His notebook lay closed beside him, its pages filled with weeks of calculations and failures. "You have been inactive for 42 minutes, Hermes said, its voice gentle but insistent. "Do you require assistance?" Tony groaned, his voice muffled against his arms. "No, Hermes, I'm fine, just tired." But it wasn't just exhaustion. After countless failures and the feeling of hitting a wall, he couldn't break through. Well, he finally noticed his limit. The workshop door opened, and footsteps echoed softly on the floor. Maria walked inside and her eyes fell on the cluttered space. She then looked at her son. "Just what are you trying to achieve? You look so exhausted." "Tony," she said gently, walking over to him. He didn't respond, too lost in his thoughts to notice her presence. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder, and he jolted upright, startled. "Mom, I'm working." "Tony," she interrupted, her tone firm but kind. "Look at me." Reluctantly, he turned to face her. The concern in her eyes made his chest tighten. "Shit, I was so focused on the project that I didn't notice anything around me. Tisk, I made her worried. That old man was enough headache for her and now she is worried about me." "But you need to take a break," she said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You're pushing yourself too hard." "I'm fine," he replied, stretching his arms, though the hoarseness of his voice betrayed him. Maria knelt beside him, her hands resting on his. "Sweetheart, you're brilliant, but even geniuses need rest. Whatever you're working on, it can wait." "It can't," Tony whispered, his voice cracking. "It's too important." She didn't press him for details. Instead, she smiled softly and extended her hand. "Come outside with me, just for a little while." "Well, I guess I needed some fresh air," he nodded and stood up. They went to the garden. The night was peaceful, the stars above twinkling. Maria and Tony sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. "See," Maria said, draping her arm around Tony's shoulders. "Doesn't this feel better?" He took a deep breath and relaxed for the first time in days. "It's nice," he admitted, though his mind still buzzed with unfinished ideas. She smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Your father and I are so proud of you, Tony. You're going to do incredible things someday. But do relax from time to time." The next morning, Tony returned to the workshop with a clearer mind and a fresh perspective. He opened his notebook to a blank page and wrote. Step 1. Take care of yourself. For the first time in weeks, he approached his work without rushing. The journey was just as important as the destination, and he realized that even failures were stepping stones to success. He smiled, his mother's words echoing in his mind, incredible things. That noon, Tony finished his regular studies and sat in his room, scribbling furiously in his notebook. But this time, his thoughts weren't solely focused on Hermes or cloaking protocols. He needed balance, and he knew it. Life couldn't be all about solving equations and debugging code. "Edwin," Tony called out, his voice carrying through the hall. A moment later, the new butler appeared in the doorway. Edwin Jarvis, a composed and kind man in his late 20s, had recently taken over after his predecessor's retirement. He carried himself with quiet efficiency, but his eyes held a warmth that made Tony feel at ease. "Yes, Master Tony?" Jarvis asked, his tone measured but curious. "I need a favor," Tony said, tapping his pen against the notebook. "There's an empty room on the 3rd floor, right? The one Dad used to store all his old junk." "Indeed, sir," Jarvis replied. "Your father intended to turn it into a second library, though he never quite found the time." "Forget that," Tony waved a hand dismissively. "I want to turn it into a gym." Jarvis blinked, his expression remaining neutral, though his eyebrows rose slightly. "A gym, sir?" "Yeah," Tony nodded, closing his notebook and standing. "I've been spending too much time cooped up in the workshop. I need something different. Something physical, to clear my head. An excellent idea, Jarvis said, inclining his head. Physical activity is vital for maintaining both mental and physical health. Shall I begin preparations immediately? Yeah, clear out the room, and we'll order the equipment. Oh, and make sure it has space for a boxing bag. I think I'd like to learn how to throw a punch. Jarvis smiled faintly. I shall see to it at once, sir. Leave some reviews as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. -- 39 comments, 0 vote. A new challenge. Tony's new routine started very early the following morning. The third floor's old storage room had become a small but very workable gym. Sunbeams from the wide windows streamed into the place and cast warm light on brand new, neatly aligned pieces of equipment against the walls. At the center of the room hung a very robust punching bag. Wearing a simple gray t-shirt and shorts, Tony was standing in front of the punching bag, wrapping his hands in soft boxing tape. Jarvis stood nearby with a clipboard, watching closely. Ready, Master Tony? Jarvis asked, his voice calm. Tony nodded. Yeah, let's do this. He started with simple punches, throwing jabs and hooks at the bag. His form was sloppy at first, but Jarvis patiently corrected him. Keep your elbows in, Jarvis said, demonstrating the motion. Power comes from your core, not just your arms. Tony shifted his position and attempted again. The blows landed this time much more forcefully, and he crossed a small smile on his face. Not bad, he said to himself, taking a few steps back to catch his breath. Then came a few rounds on the punching bag followed by push-ups, squats, and planks. He sweated plenty as the burning muscles pulled through with effort. All the foggy feelings from the past weeks of working non-stop at his workshop began to melt away. By the end of the session, he was exhausted but invigorated. Jarvis handed him a towel and a bottle of water. Well done, sir, Jarvis said. Consistency is key. Shall we continue tomorrow? Tony grinned, wiping his face with the towel. Definitely. He went for his quick shower, had his breakfast, and then went to the study room immediately, knowing full well that even though he often felt that the material was too easy to know, he still needed to stay on top of his formal education. Pay attention, Tony, his tutor said as she explained the principles of thermodynamics. I am, said Tony, though sometimes his thoughts drift to the workshop. Nevertheless, he took notes diligently, his sharp mind soaking up the information like a sponge. In the evening, Tony returned to the workshop, feeling a renewed sense of focus. He opened his notebook and reviewed his notes from the previous days. The failed cloaking protocols no longer felt like obstacles, they were challenges to overcome. Hermes, he said, turning to the AI's monitor. Let's pick up where we left off. Understood, sir, Hermes replied, its voice steady. Tony began tweaking the code for the cloaking protocol, reducing the complex problem into small work chunks. The only noise that broke the silence of the workshop was the pounding of fingers on the keyboard. He sat back into his chair, leaning back to close to 10 p.m., thinking he had done enough, and the answers were on their way. As he began to tidy up for the evening, Tony's gaze fell to his notebook. He wrote across the top of a clean page, "Balance is key to proceeding." He smiled, turned off the lights, and walked off to bed, knowing he would be repeating it all again come morning. Years later, at just 14, Tony Stark entered one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, MIT. He had spent the last few years proving to everyone that genius could not only thrive in a traditional environment but also redefine its limits. From the workshop in his home to the boundless halls of academia, Tony had achieved more than most could dream of in a lifetime. His achievements in the last few years. Well, he outdid himself. Tony's mind had become a wellspring of innovation. By 12, he had developed a revolutionary cloaking device for small drones, using a refined iteration of the protocols he'd struggled with years earlier. This project won him international recognition and awards in science and technology fairs, though Tony was already focused on the next breakthrough by the time he accepted them. Hermes, his AI assistant, had also undergone significant upgrades. Once a basic system with limited capabilities, Hermes was now an intuitive, semi-autonomous companion. Tony had coded a neural net that allowed Hermes to predict user behavior, adapting responses and operations to better suit needs. It wasn't perfect yet, it still struggled with sarcasm and human nuance, but it was leagues ahead of anything else available. Master Tony, shall we prioritize memory allocation for your new project pipeline? Hermes would ask, to which Tony often replied, Hermes, prioritize snacks. I'm on a roll. With each passing year, Tony's reputation as a prodigy grew. His tutors, often amazed at his ability to understand advanced physics and engineering concepts, would simply shake their heads as he explained theories they hadn't yet mastered. Despite all the accolades and breakthroughs, Tony had managed to keep a semblance of balance in his life. He continued the rigorous physical training he had started, developing a lean and athletic physique. Though his interest in boxing had waned, the discipline it instilled remained. And just to make sure his parents were safe at home, he made a bunch of mini drones and hid them all over the mansion. These drones can be remotely controlled and they act as cameras, keeping an eye on her. Well, he might have added some electric darts and tiny metal ball shooters in case any intruder wanted to hurt his parents. The day of his departure to MIT arrived, and the Stark mansion felt emptier than usual. Howard Stark, predictably, was absent, buried in his work on some defense contract that required his undivided attention. Maria Stark, ever the gracious and supportive mother, tried her best to make up for it. Are you sure you packed everything? She asked, her voice tinged with worry. I could have someone double-check the boxes. Mom, Tony interrupted gently, placing a hand on hers. I've got it. Relax. Hermes ran a complete inventory. Hermes's voice chimed from a nearby tablet. Indeed, Mrs. Stark, all essential and non-essential items have been accounted for and packed with 99.8% precision. Maria sighed but smiled. I know. Well, it's going to be strange not having you here. It's MIT, Mom, he said with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. I'll be fine. Besides, I'll be back for holidays, and maybe to show off my new inventions. Maria hugged him tightly, her usual poise giving way to raw emotion. I'm so proud of you, Tony. Just, don't let anyone tell you who you should be. Follow your instincts. He nodded, the rare seriousness in his expression betraying the weight of the moment. I will, Mom. Tony went to his workshop one last time before leaving. The room, which had once been cluttered with half-finished projects and scraps of ideas, now looked almost pristine. He had meticulously organized his tools and prototypes, ensuring that everything would be ready for the next time he returned. Can't believe it's been 14 years since I came to his world. Well, it's fun to live a life according to my choice. Oh, I am gonna miss this place. Okay, Hermes, he said, looking at the main console. I've set you up to manage the house systems while I'm gone. Keep an eye on Mom and Dad, all right? Of course, sir. Will you be needing remote access capabilities during your stay at MIT? Tony hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, you never know when inspiration will strike. He stood there for a moment longer, taking in the space that had been both a sanctuary and a crucible for his ideas. He then picked up a custom-made watch from the table and wore it. It was a mini computer with eye. Finally, he turned off the lights and walked out, feeling the weight of a chapter closing behind him. As Tony's bags were loaded into the sleek black car waiting in the driveway, Maria stood by, waving and smiling through her tears. Howard's absence loomed like a shadow over the moment, but Tony pretended not to notice. You'll call as soon as you get there? Maria asked. First thing, he promised, pulling her into a quick hug. The driver opened the car door, and Tony slid inside. As the car pulled away, he looked out the window, catching one last glimpse of his mother standing on the steps. He didn't feel anger at Howard's absence, he had long since stopped expecting anything different. Instead, Tony focused on the road ahead, the possibilities waiting for him at MIT. For the first time, he would be living in a place where his peers might actually challenge him, where he could test himself against the brightest minds of his generation. As the cityscape blurred past, he reached into his bag and pulled out a tablet. All right, Hermes, he said. Let's start drafting the specs for that reactor I was thinking about. No time like the present. Of course, sir, Hermes replied, the familiar voice grounding Tony in the midst of all the change. And so, as Tony Stark began this new chapter of his life, he did so with the confidence of someone who knew that the future was his to shape. Leave some reviews as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. -- 39 comments 0 vote. Rise of Hydra. Anne. This chapter is fast-paced and takes place over 1 year after Tony went to MIT. Words. 1.9k. -- Deep beneath the ruins of a Hydra base, a dull hum of machinery filled the cavernous underground facility. Screens flickered to life, casting eerie green light on the metallic walls. After decades in a dormant state, Arnim Zola's consciousness stirred within the vast network of his digital body. Initializing protocol, standby. Zola's face appeared on a screen, a ghostly, pixelated visage of the once brilliant scientist. His primary system scanned the Hydra archives, looking for operational updates. A critical alert caught his attention: Supreme Leader Johann Schmidt, missing. Presumed dead in combat with Captain Rogers. Red Skull, gone. Zola's synthesized voice echoed in the chamber. Hydra fractured, vulnerable, but not defeated. He turned his attention to Hydra's surviving resources. Decades of planning had allowed the organization to burrow deep, embedding agents in governments, corporations, and militaries across the globe. Hydra had been dormant, but not extinct. Hydra must rise again, Zola said. No more dependence on charismatic leaders. This era demands subtlety, technology, a new breed of soldier. With a directive set, he activated Hydra's remaining sleeper agents. Across the globe, encrypted messages awakened dormant cells, instructing them to regroup and prepare for a resurgence. As agents gathered in safe houses and hidden bunkers, Zola began work on his ultimate vision, Project Super Soldier. Zola retrieved data from his old research, particularly Schmidt's use of the Tesseract and the serum developed by Dr. Abraham Erskine. Though Schmidt's version of the serum had led to monstrous side effects, Zola saw potential in creating a new, albeit inferior, version. This world does not need perfection, he mused. It needs obedience. Power, controlled power. He began synthesizing a new serum, one that would enhance physical capabilities but leave the recipient entirely dependent on Hydra's resources for stability. Early tests on willing Hydra operatives were promising, though not without failures. Many subjects succumbed to the serum's toxicity, their bodies unable to handle the enhancements. He was patient and saw these failures as stepping stones. Progress requires sacrifice, he muttered, as another test subject flatlined. With the experiment in its very initial phase, he reverted all his priorities to S.H.I.E.L.D. Zola, knowing the threat S.H.I.E.L.D. posed, simultaneously identified an opportunity in strategy. Unlike Red Skull, who preferred overt action and control through brute force, Zola's approach was based on sowing mistrust and letting it develop into chaos. The penetration of S.H.I.E.L.D. began with careful planning and tactical disarray. If Hydra runs S.H.I.E.L.D., he computed, we run the world. Using Hydra's sleeper agents, Zola began embedding spies within S.H.I.E.L.D. The agents were given specific missions: sow discord, leak misinformation, and subtly redirect resources toward Hydra's goals. Zola's ultimate aim was to create internal strife, making the agency vulnerable to a full-scale Hydra takeover. Agent Alexander Pierce was one of his most critical infiltrators, a charismatic and ambitious individual who quickly rose through S.H.I.E.L.D.'s ranks. Pierce's charm and strategic acumen made him the perfect asset, and Zola began grooming him for greater influence. Patience, Zola advised through encrypted communications. S.H.I.E.L.D. will fall, but it must crumble from within. Still, in its formative years, the agency attracted talent from diverse backgrounds: scientists, soldiers, spies, and diplomats, many of whom had clashing ideologies and ambitions. Zola tasked his operatives with stoking these divisions. Using Hydra's network of sleeper agents, he orchestrated the selective leaking of classified mission reports. These leaks implicated key operatives in failures or cover-ups, causing mistrust between senior agents. One leaked file suggested that Howard Stark had withheld crucial technology during a critical mission, exposing other agents to danger. Though untrue, the report sowed doubt about Stark's loyalty. Next, they targeted the supply chain and began tampering with equipment, ensuring missions would fail or suffer costly delays. These failures were then blamed on S.H.I.E.L.D. scientists and engineers, leading to friction between the tech teams and field agents. Zola used his network to spread rumors. For instance, Howard Stark was portrayed as a selfish industrialist whose inventions were for profit, not for the sake of S.H.I.E.L.D. Similarly, it was hinted that Peggy Carter, an emerging star within the organization, was surreptitiously directing S.H.I.E.L.D. towards British interests and undermining the supremacy of America. When these tensions had reached their worst, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s leadership had become filled with suspicion and infighting. Next on the list was Dr. Hank Pym, a brilliant, fiercely independent scientist whose subatomic particle work had brought the attention of Hydra. With his invention, the Pym particle, an object could shrink or grow to any size while keeping the same mass, something that could revolutionize warfare and espionage. Zola recognized that acquiring this technology would give Hydra a significant advantage. However, Pym was notoriously distrustful of authority, particularly individuals like Howard Stark, whom he viewed as a reckless and arrogant inventor. He decided to exploit this mistrust to manipulate Pym and set him against Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. He initiated the hack by using his Hydra agents within the facility to gain access to Pym's lab network. This wasn't a straightforward task. Pym had designed sophisticated security protocols. However, Zola's digital consciousness allowed him to probe and adapt, systematically dismantling the defenses. He first planted forged evidence in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s systems, suggesting that Howard Stark had been lobbying for access to Pym's research. The fake reports included fabricated memos and emails showing Stark undermining Pym in meetings with the leadership. Pym, already wary of Stark, became convinced that his work was being stolen. Once he breached Pym's network, Zola copied detailed blueprints and formulas related to the Pym particle. To cover his tracks, he made it appear as though the breach had been orchestrated by Howard Stark, further fueling Pym's anger. Using remote access, Zola caused a series of controlled malfunctions in Pym's equipment. These malfunctions were timed to coincide with inspections by the agents, leading Pym to believe that the agency was intentionally sabotaging his work to pressure him into cooperation. With tensions at a breaking point, Zola used his Hydra operatives to nudge Pym into open conflict with Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. Hydra agents posed as sympathetic scientists, feeding Pym exaggerated accounts of Stark's influence within the agency. They suggested that Stark had been pressuring the others to take control of Pym's research, framing it as a matter of national security. During a high-profile meeting, one of Zola's operatives leaked forged documents showing Howard Stark proposing a partnership to mass-produce Pym particles for military use. Enraged, Pym stormed into the meeting and accused Stark of theft and betrayal, causing a public rift. Hydra agents subtly encouraged S.H.I.E.L.D. leadership to distance themselves from Pym, citing his unpredictable behavior as a liability. This left Pym feeling increasingly alienated and resentful, pushing him closer to leaving the agency altogether. The operation was a resounding success for Hydra. But Zola didn't get what he was looking for: the formula of the Pym particles. Hank was too careful and never uploaded any information regarding that in the database. Even the Hydra agents failed to get their hands on the main formula. All they got was an early version of some kind of equation. Pym's departure further strained relations between the scientific and operational divisions, with some blaming Howard Stark for driving away a valuable asset. Stark, for his part, dismissed the accusations but became increasingly wary of the growing hostility around him. Zola, watching from the shadows, was pleased. The divisions he had created were deep and growing. S.H.I.E.L.D., he calculated, would remain too preoccupied with internal conflicts to notice Hydra's resurgence, until it was too late. Back to Tony. Back at MIT, Tony's life was anything but ordinary. Between advanced courses, research projects, and private tinkering, he maintained a relentless pace. His ultimate goal, however, extended far beyond academic success. Tony had become fixated on a singular mission: preventing the tragedy he knew would befall his parents within 5 years. Every spare moment was spent perfecting his AI systems, upgrading Hermes, and developing surveillance tech that would allow him to monitor and protect his family. Though his academic achievements garnered accolades, Tony was haunted by the ticking clock in his mind. His dorm was filled with multiple computers, custom-built servers, and holographic displays that projected intricate code strings into the air. Tony was waging a silent war against the impenetrable defenses of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s system. He leaned back in his chair, staring at a schematic of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s digital architecture. "All right, Hermes," he muttered. "Let's see if they've earned their reputation." The AI's soothing voice responded immediately. SHIELD's encryption uses a dynamic quantum algorithm, updated every 3.7 seconds. To breach the system, I'll need to mimic and predict these shifts. He smirked. That's why I built you, buddy. Let's start with their comms hub. It's bound to have backdoor redundancies. No one trusts the front door. For days, Tony chipped away at the system's defenses, using a combination of sophisticated neural mapping algorithms and custom-built malware. Hermes intercepted and decoded patterns in the encryption, slowly creating a virtual skeleton key to SHIELD's vault. Every step of progress brought its own risks. The system occasionally sent out counter-hacks, forcing Tony to redirect Hermes' focus to protect his own servers. SHIELD's firewalls were adaptive, countering many of his probes with escalating precision. Accessing deeper layers increases the likelihood of detection, Hermes warned one evening. Noted, Tony replied, but I'm not stopping now. 3 weeks into his efforts, Tony hit pay dirt. Using a disguised signal routed through dozens of satellites and servers worldwide, Hermes found a weakness in one of SHIELD's auxiliary data storage centers. From there, he gained access to the main network, bypassing secondary protocols through the same backdoor. Done, Tony's fists clenched in triumph. The holograms around him shifted to display streams of classified information like mission logs, personnel files, and operational reports. His eyes darted across the data. It was a treasure trove, but Tony focused on one goal, Project Pegasus. Operation Paperclip. Find any mention of Howard Stark or Maria Stark or Hydra. Give me something. Hermes parsed the data at lightning speed, flagging relevant files. Within moments, a cluster of folders appeared on the main display. Tony opened the first, revealing heavily redacted documents. Sir, I've detected unusual network activity within SHIELD's mainframe, Hermes said. It appears, encrypted data is being rerouted through third-party servers. Tony frowned, pushing his laptop aside. That's not standard for a global security agency. Someone's tapping into their systems. Hermes's voice grew more urgent. The patterns are consistent with cyber espionage tactics. Probability suggests an external infiltration, potentially Hydra. Signs of artificial intelligence detected. Nice job, Tony smiled, pulling up a new screen. He finally found them. Hermes, let's see if we can follow the breadcrumbs. If Hydra's out there, I want to know everything. Leave some reviews as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. 22 comments 0 vote. Tony vs Hydra, the war of information. Tony's mind raced as he processed the implications of Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. He knew he couldn't expose them directly. Not yet. His resources were limited, his AI was still in development, and his position as a student hardly carried the weight needed to take on a global conspiracy. However, he also knew that knowledge was power, and to the present date, he hasn't wasted a single day, plus with Hermes at his side, he had an edge. Let's play a little game of cat and mouse, Tony said with a smirk. It was time to mess with the Hydra. Hermes, track the espionage patterns. I need to map out where their access points are. Hermes began analyzing the encrypted data streams Hydra had been rerouting. Sir, I've identified 4 primary nodes where suspicious activity originates. These nodes are scattered across SHIELD's global network, with strong activity in Washington, Berlin, and a facility in South America. Tony leaned closer to the holographic display. Let's isolate their footprint. We'll set traps and digital honeypots and see how they respond. If they take the bait, we can follow them back to their source. Hermes executed the plan with precision. Using simulated S.H.I.E.L.D. encryption codes, Tony created fake files labeled with enticing titles like Project Resurrection, Classified, and Enhanced Soldier Serum, Prototype Notes. These were designed to look like critical assets that Hydra would want. Within hours, one of the traps was triggered. Gotcha, Tony muttered as the false data pinged a Hydra-controlled server. Hermes quickly traced the data packet, revealing a Hydra subnet hidden deep within SHIELD's infrastructure. As he delved deeper, Hermes provided a wealth of information, encrypted Hydra communication logs, covert mission files, and most alarmingly, the identities of several sleeper agents embedded within S.H.I.E.L.D. This is bigger than I thought, Tony said, his tone more serious. These aren't just moles, they're orchestrating policy shifts, mission sabotages, and probably worse. Hermes flagged a particularly troubling name, Agent Alexander Pierce. Wow, this guy. He recognized Pierce from public briefings and news reports about SHIELD's leadership. Almost forgot about him. He rummaged through his desk drawer and found the old, worn-out notebook. Well, good old times. He opened it and saw the names and a couple of old diagrams and formulas. Well, can't take them on by myself at this moment. But, realizing he couldn't confront Pierce or S.H.I.E.L.D. directly, Tony decided to play a long game. He needed to quietly expose Hydra's presence without putting himself or his family at immediate risk. He poured every spare moment into refining Hermes, upgrading the AI's capabilities to handle Hydra's advanced countermeasures. He created algorithms to decode Hydra's encrypted messages and built stealth tools that allowed him to monitor their operations without detection. He also destroyed the old diary. He doesn't need it anymore. Moving on to Hydra, Hermes soon uncovered more Hydra agents within S.H.I.E.L.D. and connected dots that even SHIELD's analysts had missed. Using this information, Tony began crafting anonymous reports and leaks. Tony carefully prepared packets of evidence, disguising his digital footprint to make it appear as if the leaks came from within S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. He targeted trustworthy agents he believed could act against Hydra, like Peggy Carter and Howard Stark, ensuring the information reached them subtly and without arousing suspicion. The reports were damning. They included logs of covert Hydra communications, records of unexplained resource allocations that led to failed missions, names of compromised agents and their roles in sabotaging key operations. Each report was designed to stoke suspicion without revealing the full scope of Hydra's presence, forcing S.H.I.E.L.D. leadership to investigate. Within weeks, S.H.I.E.L.D. began taking internal measures, tightening security protocols, and conducting quiet investigations. Tony watched from the sidelines, satisfied to see the beginnings of change. But Hydra wasn't idle. Their network detected unusual activity, and Zola's digital presence flagged the anonymous leaks as a potential threat. Zola began deploying countermeasures, including advanced surveillance to identify the source. One night, as Tony worked on Hermes, alarms blared from his system. "Sir," Hermes warned, "an unidentified entity is attempting to breach our network. The attack patterns suggest a highly sophisticated AI, Hydra's." Tony smirked. Finally, a worthy challenge. He was a bit overconfident, but he knew his limits. "All right, Hermes, it's time to show them what we're made of. Redirect their probes and feed them false leads. Let's give them a wild goose chase." For hours, Tony and Hermes engaged in a high-stakes game of digital chess. Hydra's AI relentlessly probed his defenses, but Tony's ingenuity and Hermes' adaptability kept them at bay. Eventually, Hydra's efforts ceased, but Tony knew this wasn't the end. "They know I'm here," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But they don't know who I am yet. That's our advantage for now." Next, Tony decided it was time to correct one of Hydra's most successful manipulations, the rift between Hank Pym and Howard Stark. He knew Pym's research on Pym particles was critical, not just to S.H.I.E.L.D. but potentially to humanity's future. Letting Hydra exploit that rift was a matter he couldn't ignore. "Time to send Drive Pym a wake-up call," he muttered. He pulled up the logs Hermes had uncovered, specifically the forged memos and emails Hydra agents had planted to frame Howard Stark. The deception was brilliant but crude. There were traces of metadata that revealed when the documents had been altered and by whom. Several Hydra agents were named in encrypted communications about the operation. "Let's make sure Pym knows the truth," Tony said, crafting a carefully packaged data file. The file contained logs of Hydra communications discussing their plans to sabotage Pym's work, evidence of forged documents designed to implicate Howard Stark, records of Hydra agents tampering with Pym's equipment and systems, including time-stamped security footage from Pym's lab that Hermes had decrypted from SHIELD's archives. A detailed timeline showing how Hydra orchestrated the rift between Pym and Stark. Tony added a brief anonymous note. "Dr. Pym, you were wronged. Howard Stark had no part in the sabotage of your work. The culprits are Hydra agents embedded within S.H.I.E.L.D. They've been manipulating you, using lies to fracture alliances and sow distrust. Attached are the logs and evidence. The truth matters. Drive Pym, do with it what you will." A concerned ally, He encrypted the package with a unique signature, ensuring it wouldn't be intercepted, and sent it through multiple anonymous routing channels to reach Hank Pym's private server. The response was almost immediate. Within hours, Tony's monitoring systems flagged activity on Pym's server. The brilliant scientist had begun analyzing the logs and cross-referencing them against his own records. The revelations hit hard. Pym discovered irrefutable proof that the sabotage came from Hydra, not Howard Stark. The timestamps matched with incidents he had experienced firsthand: unexplained malfunctions, disappearing data, and even altered research results. Pym was furious. For years, he had harbored resentment against Stark, convinced the man had betrayed him for personal gain. Now, faced with the truth, that anger turned to cold determination. He began digging deeper, using the provided evidence to identify other instances of Hydra interference. Back to Tony. "Sir, I've intercepted a new piece of information regarding Janet Van Dyne," Hermes announced. Tony sat up in his chair and opened the file. "Ha, Hydra motherfuckers. I guess, messing with the events got some events messed up. Well, I wonder how Hank's gonna take this." Tony's eyes narrowed as he examined the intercepted file. The document detailed a Hydra operation codenamed Winter Veil, aimed at exploiting a critical Cold War conflict to sow chaos and advance Hydra's agenda. Among the details was a reference to Janet Van Dyne, codename Wasp, and a covert mission involving a Soviet ICBM. "Hermes," he said with a serious expression, "give me everything you can find about this mission. Cross-reference it with Hydra's plans and SHIELD's historical records." Hermes responded instantly, pulling up a complex network of files, some from Hydra's encrypted servers and others extracted from SHIELD's database. The mission's parameters began to take shape on the screen. Hydra had learned about the mission through sleeper agents embedded within S.H.I.E.L.D. Their aim wasn't just sabotage. It was to ensure the mission's catastrophic failure. If the ICBM struck its target, it would escalate tensions between the US and the Soviet Union, bringing the world closer to nuclear war. More disturbingly, Hydra intended to use this chaos to push a global agenda of fear, allowing their operatives to take control in the ensuing power vacuum. As far as Tony could remember from the movies, Janet Van Dyne's role was crucial. She had been assigned to disable the missile alongside Hank Pym. Hydra planned to compromise Janet's mission by tampering with her equipment and feeding her false intel. "This is insane," he muttered. "They're playing games with millions of lives and they don't care who gets caught in the crossfire." Hermes highlighted a critical piece of information: Hydra had planted agents in the field who would interfere directly with Janet's mission. These agents were tasked with ensuring her death, preventing her from disabling the missile, and leaving no trace of Hydra's involvement. Leave some reviews as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. 48 comments 0 vote. A deal with Hank. Hermes, package everything we have on Operation Winter Veil. Add a note emphasizing Hydra's direct interference and their plans to ensure Janet's death. Tony ordered. The AI compiled the data and, within seconds, sent it to Hank Pym's secure system. He waited, knowing full well the kind of response this would provoke. Hours later, Hermes detected unusual activity on Hank Pym's servers. Cameras inside Pym's lab revealed the man suiting up in his Ant-Man armor, his face contorted in barely restrained rage. "Oh no," Tony muttered. "Hermes, patch me through to his comm system." Inside his lab, Hank Pym was suiting up. He was angry as hell. They were going to kill her. Janet was part of their plan all along. A calm voice interrupted his train of thought. "Dr. Pym, this isn't the way to handle it." Hank froze, scanning the room. "Who the hell is this? How are you on my system?" "Call me a concerned ally," Tony said smoothly. He was obviously using a voice modulator to hide his real voice. "I'm the one who sent you the intel. And I know what you're about to do." Hank's jaw clenched. They planned to use Janet as bait, to sabotage the mission and leave her to die. "You think I'm just going to let that slide? I'm going to end them." "And what then? Let's say you take out a few Hydra agents tonight. You'll be satisfied for what? A day? A week? Hydra's a Hydra for a reason. Cut off one head, and 2 more will take its place," Tony explained, hoping he could talk sense into the man before he went on a rampage. Hank hesitated but didn't lower his suit's activation sequence. So, what? I let them walk away. That's not going to happen. No, Tony replied. We hit them where it hurts. Not their agents, not just yet. We target their command structure. Their resources. The heart of their operations. Hank's jaw tightened. And how do you suggest we do that, genius? Because last I checked, you're hiding behind a computer screen. Tony smirked. True, but brains tend to outlast brawn in battles like this. Listen, Drive, Pym, I have a plan, a big one. But I need your help. He laid out the details, his holographic display shifting to show Janet's Cold War mission logs alongside Hydra's plans for sabotage. Here's the deal, he continued. We don't interfere directly with Janet's mission. We let it play out. Hydra's agents think they have everything under control, but what they don't know is that we're going to use their weapon against them. Hank's eyes narrowed. How? We'll reprogram the missile, Tony replied. I've already accessed fragments of Hydra's network, but I can't act openly and I lack the resources to do so. That's where you come in. With your resources and brain, we can pinpoint Hydra's base of operations and the agents. On the day of the launch, we'll redirect the missile. It'll lock onto Hydra's base instead of its original target. But to pull it off, we are gonna need some people inside to make sure everything goes smoothly, and they will be keeping an eye on the Hydra agents within. Then on the day of the launch, our people will eliminate the agents and the missile will hit its target. We will take them down in a single swoop and Janet won't have to put her life at risk, Hank said, now understanding Tony's plan. Exactly, Tony nodded. And even if it fails, I've other ways to save her. I'll share the details in case of failure. And what are you going to get out of it? Hank asked with a serious expression. I doubt you are doing this out of charity. 2 favors. I'll ask them when it's time, and no matter what, you will help me out, deal? Tony offered. If this plan of yours succeeds, then deal, Hank agreed. Tony knew he couldn't do anything to save Janet, but he was able to keep Hank from making a mistake that would endanger her. He smiled and shook his head. All right, so, I'll keep digging on my end and let you know if I discover something new, while you find a way to place some trusted people within the enemy ranks. Other than information exchange through my secure line, we won't interact. And most importantly, do not try to find me. Understood? Yes, I understand. And thank you, for all of this, Hank said gratefully. Don't thank me yet, Tony replied, not till this is over. He cut the communication. He was about to get some much-needed sleep, but suddenly, a knock on the door made him sigh. Who is it? He asked cautiously, wondering who came looking for him at this hour of the night. He powered down his system. The holograms disappeared in an instant, leaving behind the mundane sight of textbooks, blueprints, and a half-eaten sandwich scattered across his desk. He walked to the door, raking a hand through his hair, attempting to mask the stress etched on his face. It's me, James, Rhodey's voice came through the door. Rhodey, he greeted, feigning surprise. Tony met Rhodey the day he arrived at MIT, and soon they became good friends and somewhat small rivals. Since Tony knew about the future somewhat thanks to his past life info, he wasn't expecting to meet Rhodey here. He thought that somehow his interference with the events might be changing things, like the butterfly effect, or he was probably the MCU version. James Rhodes stood there, his face a mix of annoyance and concern. He was in his usual gray t-shirt and blue jeans. He crossed his arms, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. Tony, what the hell are you up to? Tony leaned casually against the doorframe, forcing a smirk. Me, nothing, just your average late-night study session. Thermodynamics waits for no one, my friend. Rhodey raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. And that's why you've got a security protocol running on your laptop that's more advanced than anything I've seen in the ROTC labs. Don't even try to tell me it's homework. He raised his arms in the air. Okay, maybe I was working on a side project. You know me, always tinkering. What's got you storming into my dorm at this hour, anyway? Something on your mind? Rhodey didn't buy it but decided to let the dodge slide, for now. He stepped closer, his tone softening. Look, man, I know you. Something's been eating at you lately. You've been skipping classes, blowing off the team, and now this cloak and dagger tech you've been playing with. If you're in trouble, you need to tell me. Curious, aren't ya? Worried. Worried is more accurate, Rhodey corrected him. I've been trying to respect your privacy, but if you're digging yourself into a hole, I'm not gonna let you do it alone. He sighed. Okay, you're right, I've been keeping something from you. I think you should sit down. The two sat in the cramped space of Tony's dorm. You remember how those arrogant punks said I can't hack into the Pentagon? Wait, you didn't? Rhodey looked shocked. Tony gave an arrogant smirk as he pulled out the laptop from the bag and placed it on the bed. The moment he powered it up, Rhodey gasped in shock. The screen showed the Pentagon logo with the words "Access Granted" beneath it. How did you do that? Rhodey asked in disbelief. Tony, this is insane. Well, I used the public terminal, Tony replied casually. I hacked into it using their own network and gained admin access. You gotta be kidding me, Rhodey whispered, shocked as hell. Do you know the kind of shit you can get yourself into? What were you thinking? I was bored, Tony lied, not wanting to reveal too much. Besides, it's been a week, no response from their end, so I guess they didn't notice anything. Don't jinx it. Come on, don't you want to try it out? Tony asked. What do you think, James? Do you for once in your life want to go through the Pentagon's files and footage? Or perhaps, control the entire place just for once? If that's not up to your alley, maybe we could use their surveillance system to peek at anyone we want without them knowing what we are doing. Just imagine the fun. Rhodey's eye twitched at that. He was a rule follower, but Tony had awakened a new curiosity in him. He wanted to do what Tony said, though he knew he shouldn't. Oh, what's this? Tony asked, faking surprise as he pulled up a live footage from NY. A naked girl with purple hair and hazel eyes. Rhodey almost choked at seeing her. Cough. That's a porn star, he said, looking away. Wow, I never knew you liked that sort of stuff. Tony teased. I don't. I mean, she's just someone I saw on the TV recently, that's all. Rhodey said, his face red. Come on, switch it off. Ha ha ha. Okay, I'll forward the recordings to you later. Now, how about that freaking racist professor who's after your ass? He asked with a smirk. Huh, what about him? Take a look. Tony pulled up his files. Name, Rick Perkin. Age, 65. Married. Yes. Spouse, Mary Perkin. Under the surveillance of the DIA for connection with the cartel. What the fuck? I mean, oh my god, did you see this? Rhodey asked in shock. The man is corrupt. Yeah, and you know what this means, right? Tony asked with a smirk. Rhodey looked at him with a frown. He's about to get fired. Tony said, laughing. We won't be caught, right? Nope. Okay, let's do it. Rhodey nodded, excited as hell. So, Tony leaked the information and even exaggerated some facts to make it sound worse. Sure enough, 2 days later, Perkins was fired, and just outside the campus, waiting for him was the DIA agent. Back to Pim. Hank was staring at the screen displaying the intel from the unknown source. His hands trembled, but whether it was from anger or uncertainty, he couldn't say. The data laid bare Hydra's scheme. Janet, his Janet, had been nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game. It was the kind of revelation that could unearth the rage he had buried for decades. The Ant-Man helmet rested beside him, waiting, almost calling. Every fiber of his being screamed for action. To tear Hydra apart, piece by piece, to make them pay. But then, there was the voice. Calm, calculated, and maddeningly anonymous. Dr. Pym, this isn't the way to handle it. He hated that the stranger had a point. Charging in would satisfy his anger but accomplish little else. Hydra wasn't just some street gang. They were a multinational monstrosity, with resources and contingencies far beyond anything he could tackle on his own. Still, trusting a faceless ally. That wasn't something he did. Not anymore. His gaze fell to the data again. It was comprehensive, too comprehensive. Whoever this concerned ally was, they had access to resources far beyond what any civilian should. The schematics, the mission logs, the precise timing of Hydra's sabotage plans, this was SHIELD-level intel. Maybe higher. How the hell did they get this? He muttered under his breath. Janet always said his paranoia would be his undoing. But wasn't paranoia warranted in a world where everyone seemed to have an agenda? What if this was a trap? What if the intel itself was bait to lure him into an ambush? He stood abruptly, pacing the room. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was this some twisted Hydra ploy to get him off their trail? Or could it be someone from S.H.I.E.L.D. testing his loyalty? No, S.H.I.E.L.D. was too bureaucratic for something this covert. This had the hallmarks of someone working independently. His thoughts returned to Janet. Her laugh, her stubborn streak, the way she always seemed to see the good in people, even when he couldn't. If this intel was real, he wouldn't let her go on that mission. But if it was fake, then Janet would. The missile, countless lives would be lost. Could he live with himself for falling for a trap? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. This wasn't just about Janet or Hydra or whoever this anonymous ally was. It was about doing what he'd always done, protecting the people he cared about, no matter the cost. Finally, he sat back down and stared at the communicator. If this is a trap, he thought grimly, I'll make them regret it. But for now, he would play along. Not because he trusted the mysterious voice, but because it gave him something he couldn't ignore, a plan. A chance. He would verify the data, and double-check every detail. If even one piece of it seemed off, he'd abandon the plan and find another way to save Janet. Alone if he had to. Hank put on the helmet. You're lucky Janet's life is worth more than my pride, he muttered to himself, activating the suit. He plans to infiltrate the Soviets to check the data from the direct source. Leave some reviews and power stones as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. 31 comments 0 vote. Creating Elena. Tony Stark wasn't the type to do things halfway. When he decided to focus on something, it wasn't just about reaching the goal. It was about doing even better than anyone thought possible, even better than he thought he could. Robotics had always interested him, and MIT gave him the perfect place to explore it. But Tony didn't want to just use the university's resources. He wanted his own space, where he could work without any limits or rules, so he could create freely and without anyone getting in the way. His mom didn't take any time to think when he called her with his request. "Mom, I need a place to myself," Tony said. "Somewhere I can focus on my work without people always watching me." Maria's voice was kind but clear. "Tony, is this because of your studies? Or is this one of your—" "Mom," he cut in, "it's not about school. It's something much more important. There's a competition coming up and I plan to do something big." Maria chuckled gently. "All right, Tony. But remember, if you cause any damage, you're the one who has to fix it." While Maria taking care of the place, Tony decided to begin the outlines for his project. His first major goal was to design robots for an upcoming robotics competition at MIT. The challenge: build a pair of autonomous robots capable of completing complex tasks with limited human intervention. The robots needed to exhibit teamwork, adaptability, and efficiency. He decided to go with the AUG robot arms that Tony created in the MCU, DUM-E, a helper bot arm capable of heavy lifting and multi-purpose utility, and U, a more analytical and efficient counterpart. Together, they would complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. Within weeks, the small brick building a few blocks from campus became his private sanctuary. Stark Labs 1.0, as he jokingly called it. It wasn't much to look at. A modest 2-story structure with a basement, but it was all his. The ground floor housed his workbenches and machinery, the second floor had a small lounge for late-night crashes, and the basement, well, that was where the magic would happen. Well, Tony was kinda surprised to see that his dad, who became an alcoholic man, decided to help him with the materials and equipment. Later he called his mom to ask about the situation and he was glad to know that Howard's drinking problem got under control and he was even taking therapy. He was glad to know the situation. With him exposing Hydra agents from the S.H.I.E.L.D.'s facilities and even mending his relationship with Hank, it must have taken a huge pressure off Howard's shoulders. He just hoped that his father would continue this healthy path. After that, he began the main project. Tony began with a whiteboard filled with scribbles, sketches, and equations. The vision for DUM-E was clear: a single robotic arm on a mobile base, designed to assist with repetitive tasks while being endearingly human in its interactions. U, on the other hand, would have a more streamlined, multifunctional design, with sensors and AI tailored for precision and problem solving. Tony Stark wasn't the type to let setbacks slow him down, but even with an endless supply of materials from his dad, creating DUM-E and U wasn't as easy as he had hoped. Over 4 months, Stark Labs 1.0 became a whirlwind of late nights, holographic projections, and constant revisions. He began by outlining the core objectives for his project. He split his work into 3 phases. 1. Build Dummy, a mobile robotic arm for heavy lifting and basic tasks. 2. Develop You, a precision-oriented analytical counterpart. 3. If time allows, attempt a humanoid design. He started with Dummy. Using high-grade servo motors, industrial-grade steel alloys, and gyroscopic stabilizers provided by Howard, Tony assembled the robotic arm. Dummy's base proved problematic. It struggled to move smoothly on uneven surfaces. He redesigned it twice, switching from simple wheels to an omnidirectional track system, which allowed the arm to pivot and glide with precision. Despite setbacks, Tony maintained a relentless pace. When he wasn't soldering circuits or tweaking motor calibrations, he was feeding Hermes, his AI assistant, with new algorithms. He wanted Hermes to not just assist him but also learn from mistakes and anticipate needs. By the 2nd month, Dummy was functional, though imperfect. It could lift heavy objects and follow basic commands, but its grip was inconsistent, and its movements lacked finesse. One memorable incident involved Dummy flinging a wrench across the lab during a test. "Great aim," Tony muttered, rubbing his temple, "but not quite what I need." With Hermes's help, Tony optimized Dummy's grip mechanics, adding force sensors to prevent overexertion. By the end of the month, Dummy could delicately pick up a glass without shattering it, an achievement Tony celebrated with a smirk and a can of soda. Next, he turned his attention to You. Unlike Dummy, You required a higher level of precision and complexity. Using lightweight alloys and advanced lidar sensors, Tony designed You to be faster and more agile. Its core feature was a modular tool system, allowing it to swap attachments for various tasks. By the 3rd month, Dummy and You were performing well enough that Tony's mind began to wander toward his third, more ambitious idea, Project Elena, a humanoid robot. He watched the robotic arms performing. Well, that was too easy. "I'm a genius." He looked back at the stacks of raw materials. "Well, Hermes, we got time. Shall we try something big?" Tony dove into Elena's design, starting with her frame. He decided on a child-sized robot, small enough to be maneuverable, but large enough to house advanced components. Using the lightweight titanium alloy Howard had shipped, Tony built Elena's skeletal structure. Getting her legs to work was a monumental challenge. Initial prototypes wobbled uncontrollably or fell over entirely. "Third time's the charm," Tony said, bracing himself as Elena's legs took their first hesitant steps. This time, they held steady. For her core systems, Tony adapted Hermes's AI. He rewrote parts of the code, giving Elena a more interactive, human-like personality. He also integrated a visual interface, a pair of expressive optical sensors that allowed her to look around and focus on tasks. The final month was a frenzy of fine-tuning and integration. By now, Dummy and You had become Tony's indispensable helpers. Dummy handled heavy assembly tasks, while You meticulously tested Elena's circuits and sensors. Tony worked day and night, his whiteboard covered with equations and flowcharts. Coffee cups piled up alongside discarded blueprints. Howard occasionally checked in, impressed by his son's progress but careful not to interfere. Elena's programming was the most demanding part. Tony wanted her to be more than just functional, he wanted her to be adaptable. He programmed her to learn from her environment and respond dynamically to new challenges. One evening, after weeks of debugging, Tony powered Elena on for the first time. Her optical sensors flickered to life, glowing a soft blue. She turned her head toward him and tilted it slightly, as if curious. "Hello, Tony," she said, her voice soft but clear. Tony stared, caught off guard by the lifelike quality of her voice. "Hey, Elena," he said, grinning. "Welcome to the team." From that moment, Elena became the centerpiece of Tony's work. She quickly proved to be more than just a robot. She was a problem solver, suggesting refinements for Dummy and You, and even helping Tony organize his chaotic workspace. Tony's life became a high-wire act as he juggled perfecting his robots, taking classes at MIT, and ensuring that the AI behind his creations didn't spiral out of control. Then there was Hydra. His days started early and ended late, often blending into each other. After Elena's activation, he realized the stakes of what he was building. These weren't just gadgets, They were intelligent systems, and their potential to misbehave, intentionally or otherwise, wasn't lost on him. One of his professors, Drive, Anton Steele, had once warned during a lecture. An AI is only as ethical as the hands that shape it. Build carelessly, and it could destroy more than you intended. That statement stuck with Tony. He spent the next week developing layers of safety protocols for all his creations. Hermes became central to this effort. He expanded its role, making it a supervisor AI for the other systems. He programmed Hermes to monitor the robots' actions, ensure they operated within set parameters, and immediately shut them down if they veered off course. Elena, with her growing learning capabilities, presented the biggest challenge. Tony implemented a sandbox mode that isolated her higher functions during her learning phases, ensuring she couldn't affect the external systems while she experimented and grew. He also added what he jokingly referred to as the Buster Protocol, a hardwired remote shutdown that required Tony's biometric confirmation to override. While his work at Stark Labs 1.0 consumed his nights, MIT demanded his attention during the day. Tony attended classes on advanced robotics, quantum computing, and applied physics, often impressing or infuriating his professors with his knack for challenging conventional theories. Dr. Steele noticed Tony's brilliance and pulled him aside after a lecture one day. "Mr. Stark," he said, folding his arms, "you're clearly working on something significant. But don't let your ambition outpace your discipline." Tony smirked. "Don't worry, Doc, I've got a system. You better. Brilliance without caution can be catastrophic." Those words echoed in Tony's mind as he returned to the lab that evening. He wasn't just building machines, he was laying the foundation for his future. He wants to build mecha and cybernetics, and to do that, he has to start somewhere. Dumb E and U became increasingly indispensable. Dumb E's strength and dexterity improved with every iteration. Tony added a vocal interface to give it basic verbal commands, making communication smoother. "Dumb E, hand me the screwdriver," Tony said during a late-night repair session. Dumb E wobbled over, holding out the tool. Finally getting the hang of it, Tony muttered with a tired grin. U, on the other hand, had become an efficiency machine. Its modular tools allowed it to perform precise tasks, from soldering delicate circuits to testing Elena's sensors. Elena's progress amazed even Tony. Her adaptive learning algorithms made her intuitive and resourceful. One afternoon, as Tony struggled to debug an error in Dumb E's mobility module, Elena stepped in. "Tony," she said, "I've analyzed the issue. The gyroscopic stabilizer isn't receiving consistent voltage. Would you like me to rewire the circuit?" Tony raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Go ahead, Elena, show me what you've got." Within minutes, the problem was resolved. As the MIT robotics competition approached, Tony decided his creations weren't just about winning. They were a proof of concept, a glimpse of what the future could look like. But he knew they needed to be practical as well as impressive. He worked on enhancing the robots' ability to collaborate. Dumb E, U, and Elena were programmed to work as a team, each complementing the other's strengths. Dumb E handled heavy lifting and assembly, U ensured precision, and Elena coordinated the workflow, making adjustments on the fly. Hermes became their collective brain, overseeing their interactions and preventing conflicts. Tony tested their teamwork with increasingly complex tasks like building intricate models, solving puzzles, and even assembling components for Elena's upgrades. One night, while testing a new subroutine, Tony noticed an anomaly in Elena's behavior. She hesitated before responding to a command, her optical sensors dimming briefly. "Something wrong, Elena?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she replied. "I detected a potential conflict in my decision-making process. It resolved itself, but I'll need to analyze the root cause." Tony's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of situation he wanted to avoid. He immediately paused her operations and reviewed her logs. The issue turned out to be a minor glitch in her learning algorithm, but it was a wake-up call. The next day, Tony doubled down on safety protocols. He created redundancy checks, enhanced Hermes's monitoring capabilities, and developed a new failsafe, an AI quarantine mode that isolated any system showing irregular behavior. "You're not going rogue on my watch," he muttered, finishing the update. On the night before the competition, he stood back and surveyed his work. Dumb E's robust frame gleamed under the lab's lights. Yu's sleek design and interchangeable tools looked flawless. Elena, standing between them, tilted her head and gave Tony what he swore was a proud look. "You three are going to change the world," he said softly. Elena responded with a hint of humor in her voice. "Let's win this competition first, Tony." He grinned. "Smart Alec. Let's do it. Tony's age. 16. Leave some reviews and power stones as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. 15 comments, 0 vote. Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom. The MIT robotics competition wasn't just a simple contest, it was a place where the smartest minds in the country came to compete. Students from MIT, as well as participants from universities around the world, used their creativity and skills to build robots that tested the limits of what was possible in robotics. It was highly competitive, with a $50,000 prize, a highly respected trophy, and, most importantly, the chance to be recognized as one of the best in the field. For many, the main goal was the money because, at that time, $50,000 was a huge amount, and it could help them fund and grow their projects even further. Tony, wearing his signature confidence and a brown jacket, strolled into the competition hall. The buzz of excitement filled the air, mingling with the hum of machines being calibrated and the occasional crackle of sparks from last-minute repairs. There were too many opponents. Well, to him, they didn't look that great. Some might say he had access to high-tech and research materials. But even so, he did build them on his own. And just like him, not all but many students had that same advantage. Tony could see some famous faces there who came to accompany their kids. Tony felt a bit disappointed and a little sad. He wanted his parents to see his first achievement, but sadly they weren't there with him. Shaking off that bad mood, he continued to walk toward his booth. Dummy, Yu, and Elena followed closely, each robot drawing intrigued stares and whispers from the crowd. "Wow, Stark's brought a team," one student muttered. Another chuckled, "Let's see if his engineering is as good as his ego." Tony ignored the comments, his focus razor sharp. He approached the registration desk, handing over his entry details. "Stark Labs, huh," the official said, arching an eyebrow. "Good luck. You'll need it against the seniors and the pros." Tony smirked. "Luck's for people who don't plan." The theme for the competition was collaborative robotics for real-world applications. Teams were challenged to build robots that could autonomously execute a series of complex tasks. The tasks included building a modular structure, solving a logistical puzzle, and completing a high-stakes rescue scenario within a time limit. Tony knew that with his robots, he had a shot at victory. The first round began with a daunting assembly challenge. Teams had to build a structure from scattered parts, following a detailed schematic displayed on a large screen. The catch: the parts were dispersed across a field littered with obstacles, requiring robots to locate and transport them to the assembly zone. Tony stepped up to the starting line with his robots. "All right, team," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Move out." As the buzzer sounded, Dummy surged forward, its omnidirectional tracks gliding smoothly over the uneven terrain. It located and gripped a large beam, deftly navigating around hurdles. "Good boy, Dummy," Tony murmured, watching the display feed. Yu waited in the assembly zone, its sensors scanning Dummy's incoming load. As Dummy placed the beam, Yu's modular arm extended, locking it precisely into position. Elena monitored the process and adjusted the sequence to optimize efficiency. In less than 5 minutes, Tony's team had completed the task, leaving the audience in awe. "Impressive. You are the first one in the history of this competition who brought a humanoid robot and 2 robot assistants." Anton Steele, one of the judges, walked up to Tony's bench. "If you don't mind me asking, how did you control those robots?" "I don't see a controller. Are you perhaps using a self-aware AI?" "Good question, but I don't think I'll answer that question. After all, we all have our secrets, right, Professor Steele?" Tony said with a smile. "True that. Sorry, I couldn't help but ask. The idea of a humanoid robot. Well, it was just my dream, and seeing it right before my eyes." "Well," he took out a card and handed it to him. "If you want to talk, give me a call." "I'll keep that in mind," Tony said. The The second round tested strategic thinking and problem solving. Teams had to program their robots to sort and transport a set of colored cubes to specific zones, following a series of complex rules. Any mistakes would result in penalties. Elena took charge, her AI analyzing the puzzle in real time. Tony, I've identified the optimal sequence, she said. Go for it, Elena, Tony replied. Show them what you've got. Dummy and you moved with precision under Elena's direction. Dummy's powerful grip handled the heavier cubes, while Yu's nimble arm sorted smaller, color-coded pieces into their designated spots. When the rules changed mid-task, a twist designed to test adaptability, Elena recalculated instantly. Adjusting path, she said, her voice steady. The robots executed flawlessly, finishing the round with 0 penalties. The crowd erupted into applause. Even Tony's competitors looked impressed, though some masked it with grumbles. Who is this guy? A senior competitor muttered. The last round was the most demanding. Teams had to simulate a rescue operation, retrieving a fragile artifact from a dangerous terrain filled with obstacles and hazards. The task required precision, teamwork, and speed. Tony's strategy was the same as before. The robots were working fine with no glitch. Hermes monitored the entire operation, ensuring safety protocols were followed. As the round began, Dummy moved into the hazardous zone, its sensors mapping a safe path. It lifted a fallen beam blocking the artifact, allowing Yu to move in. Yu's litter sensors scanned the artifact, a glass orb, and its modular arm extended with surgical precision to retrieve it. Halfway through the task, a competitor's robot malfunctioned, sending a shockwave across the field. The vibration caused Dummy to lose balance momentarily. Dummy, stabilize, Tony barked. Hermes intervened, recalibrating Dummy's gyroscopes. It regained stability just in time, preventing a disaster. Meanwhile, Elena adapted the team's strategy, coordinating the final stretch with seamless efficiency. With seconds to spare, Dummy, Yu, and Elena delivered the artifact safely to the extraction point. The crowd went wild. As the judges added up the scores, Tony leaned on a workbench and took a relaxed sip of his soda. He already felt sure he had won, but it was still satisfying to hear it officially. The winner of the MIT robotics competition, with a perfect performance in every round, is Stark Labs. The hall erupted in cheers and applause. Tony stepped onto the stage, with his robots following him. Dr. Steele handed him the trophy, a sleek, chrome sculpture of interlocking gears and a $50,000 check. Congratulations, Mr. Stark, Steele said, smiling. You've set a new standard for this competition. Tony took the mic, his trademark smirk firmly in place. Thank you, everyone. This wasn't just about building robots, it was about showing what's possible when you think big and work smart. And trust me, this is just the beginning. The victory brought him more than just money and recognition. It solidified his reputation as a prodigy, opening doors to opportunities he hadn't even considered. Professors and industry leaders approached him with offers, eager to collaborate or recruit him. Back at Stark Labs 1.0, Tony celebrated with Dummy, Yu, and Elena. He held the trophy high, grinning as the robots beeped and whirred in what he imagined was their version of applause. You guys did great, he said, setting the trophy on a shelf. But don't get too comfortable. We've got bigger things to build. Elena tilted her head, her optical sensors glowing warmly. What's next, Tony? Tony chuckled, already sketching ideas on his whiteboard. Oh, you'll see. Let's just say this is where the fun begins. While Tony was basking in the glory of victory, the shift in the timeline has already begun. Victor Von Doom's jaw clenched as he stood on the competition stage, staring at the trophy and check in his hands. The polite applause from the audience felt like mockery in his ears, each clap pounding like a drumbeat against his pride. He refused to look at Tony Stark, who stood a few feet away basking in his victory, holding the grand trophy aloft with that insufferable smirk plastered across his face. Doom's hands tightened around his runner-up trophy until his knuckles turned white. Second place. To him. As the crowd cheered for Stark Labs, Victor barely contained his fury. His team of meticulously engineered robots had performed flawlessly, or so he thought. His designs were calculated to perfection, and his algorithms were crafted with the precision of a master. And yet, it wasn't enough. The voice of one of the judges still echoed in his mind. Stark Labs robots demonstrated superior teamwork and adaptability, traits essential for real-world applications. Mr. Stark has truly redefined collaboration between AI systems. Adaptability, collaboration, words that stung like knives. Doom didn't care about teamwork, his designs were meant to dominate, to crush the competition with sheer brilliance. Yet, here he was, standing in Stark's shadow. Without a word, he took his robots and went to the back of the hall and smashed them up with an iron rod until they became scraps. Master Victor, his butler followed him. Clean up the trash and send it to my study, Victor said calmly. Don't worry, I'll stay for the party. He smiled and left the scene. He knew he had to keep an appearance to keep up his reputation for now. The butler as ordered sent the scraps back home. The journey back to his home was a blur. By the time Victor stepped into his estate, an imposing mansion on the outskirts of Cambridge, the rage simmering within him had grown into a roaring inferno. The grand, empty halls did nothing to soothe his turmoil. He stormed into his study, slamming the doors shut behind him. The room was dimly lit, the flickering light from a crackling fireplace casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. Victor stood before the fire, his breathing heavy, the second-place trophy and check still clutched in his hands. For a moment, he stared at the objects as if they were mocking him. His reflection in the polished surface of the trophy's plaque seemed to taunt him with the words etched there. Runner-up, MIT Robotics Competition. With a guttural growl, he hurled the trophy into the flames. The metal clanged against the hearth before the fire swallowed it, the heat warping its once pristine surface. Next, he tore the check in half, then into quarters, the pieces fluttering like ash before he tossed them onto the burning logs. The fire roared in response, as though feeding on his fury. Victor turned, his eyes landing on the smashed remnants of his robots strewn across the floor. Their once elegant frames now lay twisted and broken, wires spilling out like entrails. He approached the wreckage, his fists clenching and unclenching. These machines were supposed to be his magnum opus, a testament to his genius. Instead, they had been humiliated. By him. Tony Stark's face loomed in his mind, that smug grin and those flippant remarks. Stark hadn't even acknowledged Victor as a rival, treating him as little more than a footnote in his own success story. Think big and work smart, Stark had said during his victory speech, as if to mock Victor's methodical precision. His lip curled into a snarl. For a fleeting moment, he imagined wrapping his hands around Stark's throat, wiping that arrogance from his face forever. The thought brought a twisted sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. No, killing Stark would be too easy. Victor's mind raced, his anger fueling his darker side. Stark needed to be humbled, his genius dismantled piece by piece until nothing remained but a broken man begging for mercy. Only then would Victor Von Doom feel vindicated. He slumped into the leather armchair before the fire, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Slowly, his breathing steadied, though his anger remained. But now, it was no longer a wild, uncontrollable fury. It was something colder, more calculating. He had underestimated Stark, but that would not happen again. Victor's mind churned with possibilities, his intellect cutting through the fog of his rage like a scalpel. Stark's victory had exposed a weakness in Victor's approach, a blind spot he had been too arrogant to see. Collaboration, Victor muttered, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. If Stark wanted to play the game of teamwork and adaptability, then Victor would surpass him on every front. He would create something far beyond what Stark could even comprehend, a marvel of engineering and intellect that would cement Victor Von Doom's place as the superior genius. Rising from the chair, Victor walked to his workbench. He surveyed the broken pieces of his robots, his mind already envisioning their rebirth. These failures would become the foundation of something greater. Leave some reviews and power stones as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. Can I get 1000 PS this week? You are getting big CHS over 2K words. So, you better give me those PS. Excalibur_X creators thoughts. 41 comments 0 vote. Hank's infiltration. And, come on you all, more power stones if you want me to upload daily. Hank Pym stood in his workshop, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lab's computer monitors. Before him was his Ant-Man suit, though calling it that now didn't do it justice. This was no longer the simple shrinking suit he'd used during his early missions. He'd spent the last 3 sleepless nights upgrading every component. The wings, inspired by Janet's wasp design, gleamed faintly in the fluorescent light. A miniaturized propulsion system now enabled true flight, giving him the edge he sorely needed for this mission. He slipped into the suit, the helmet fitting snugly over his head. As the internal HUD came to life, a familiar voice spoke. "Everything seems operational. Drive." Pym, his AI companion, RED. Resourceful engineering device, chimed in. "Flight capabilities are nominal, and the new cloaking system is fully functional. Would you like me to run another diagnostic?" "No time, RED. We're doing this live." Hank's voice was firm, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his nerves. "Understood. I've also preloaded the Soviet communication frequencies you requested. You'll be able to intercept and decode their transmissions within a 15-mile radius." "Good." Hank activated the suit's shrinking mechanism, his body compressing down to the size of an ant. He leapt onto a waiting drone that zipped him toward the ventilation shaft, his chosen point of exit. As he soared into the night, Hank replayed Tony's words in his mind. The man, whoever he was, had given him a lead. But trust was a luxury Hank couldn't afford. He'd verify the intel himself. If this was a trap, he would uncover it. And if it wasn't, well, Hydra wouldn't know what hit them. Soviet base. The Soviet facility was hidden deep within a frozen wasteland, surrounded by towering pine trees and a blanket of snow that seemed to absorb all sound. From his aerial vantage point, Hank watched the base through his helmet's enhanced optics. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their movements methodical and precise. The main structure was a squat, concrete building. There was an array of antennas bristling from the roof. Not to mention the automated turrets. "RED, scan the area," Hank commanded. Scanning. The facility houses approximately 46 personnel, including guards and engineers. Thermal signatures indicate a secured underground bunker. That is likely where their missile control center is located. "Figures," Hank muttered. "Let's get inside." The upgraded suit's wings buzzed softly as he descended toward the base. Activating the cloaking system, Hank rendered himself invisible to both the naked eye and electronic surveillance. He slipped past the guards at the main gate, shrinking further to avoid detection. At the size of a flea, he darted through a crack beneath the door. Inside, the facility was a hive of activity. Engineers huddled over blueprints, soldiers marched through corridors, and radio operators relayed encrypted messages. Hank navigated the labyrinthine halls, his HUD guiding him toward the bunker entrance. "RED, are we picking up any chatter about Hydra or the missile?" he asked. "Negative, drive, Pym. Most transmissions are routine. However, I've flagged a secure channel that could be of interest. Shall I attempt to decrypt it?" "Do it." As the AI worked, Hank arrived at a heavily guarded elevator. It was the only access point to the underground bunker. He perched on a guard's shoulder, listening as they exchanged passcodes and swiped keycards. "Got it," Hank whispered, memorizing the sequence. He jumped from the guard's shoulder onto the keypad, using the suit's built-in interface to mimic the access code. The elevator doors slid open, and he slipped inside unnoticed. The elevator descended slowly, the temperature dropping slightly as it carried him deeper into the earth. When the doors opened, he was greeted by a sprawling command center. Dozens of monitors lined the walls, displaying missile schematics, surveillance footage, and streams of data in Russian. At the center of the room was the missile itself, a towering behemoth, its warhead gleaming ominously under the fluorescent lights. "RED, analyze the warhead," Hank said. So, he was right. Damn, these bastards. If it weren't for the plan, I'd have destroyed this entire place. Analysis complete. The payload is consistent with a high-yield thermonuclear device. Based on its targeting systems, the missile is primed to strike the United States. Hank's stomach tightened. Janet's mission had been to retrieve intel about Soviet missile development, but Hydra's interference had turned it into a death trap. If the missile launched, millions could die and Janet would likely be among the casualties. "Decrypt complete," RED announced. The secure channel contains directives from Hydra operatives embedded within the Soviet ranks. They plan to activate a secondary sabotage mechanism during the missile test to ensure mission failure. "Bastards," Hank growled. "Can we disable it?" "Affirmative. However, Accessing the sabotage mechanism will require direct interaction with the missile's control panel. Hank scanned the room. Soviet engineers were clustered around the control panel, their attention focused on the missile's diagnostics. He couldn't risk exposing himself. He needed a distraction. He activated the suit's swarm protocol, releasing a contingent of robotic ants from a compartment on his back. The tiny machines scurried across the floor, heading toward the facility's power junction. Within moments, the lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. The engineers scrambled, shouting in Russian as they tried to restore power. In the chaos, he flew toward the control panel, landing on its surface. He resized to a few inches tall, just enough to interact with the controls. "Red, guide me through the sabotage mechanism." Accessing, the mechanism is located within the missile's targeting system. You'll need to interface directly with its internal circuitry. Hank's hands moved fast, dismantling the panel and exposing the intricate wiring beneath. He connected a data cable from his suit to the missile, allowing RED to begin reprogramming the targeting system. Reprogramming in progress. Estimated time: 90 seconds, the AI reported. "Hurry it up," Hank muttered. The engineers were already beginning to restore power, and it wouldn't be long before they noticed him. The room remained chaotic, with engineers scrambling to resolve the power outage, unaware of the true sabotage occurring under their noses. The missile's targeting system chirped softly, signaling the completion of the override. "Reprogramming complete," RED announced. "Missile target coordinates have been updated to Hydra's Siberian base. Secondary command protocols embedded and secured." Hank disconnected his suit from the control panel and sealed the access port. "Good work, RED. Let's move." He shrank to his smallest size and buzzed toward the ceiling vents, narrowly avoiding a guard who entered the room with a flashlight. The next phase of the plan required access to the facility's main server room. Hank navigated through the ventilation system, using his suit's enhanced optics to map the base's layout. The server room was located near the center of the underground facility, heavily secured with biometric scanners and armed guards. However, he shrank even further than the smallest of ants. He flew through a gap between the server room door and its frame, hovering over a surveillance camera. "RED, take control of the server room cameras and loop the footage." Accessing, cameras disabled. "Perfect. Now we need a backdoor installed, something deep and untraceable." "Understood. Drive, PIM, beginning interface." Hank connected his suit to the server terminal, watching as lines of code scrolled across his HUD. "How long?" "Estimated time: 3 minutes. I recommend staying alert. The power restoration efforts will likely draw attention here soon." "Noted," Hank muttered, his eyes scanning the room. He adjusted his suit's cloaking field, blending into the shadows. RED worked efficiently as the seconds ticked by, embedding a covert access point deep within the server's code. This backdoor would allow Hank to monitor and manipulate the facility's systems remotely, a critical advantage for the larger mission. "Backdoor installation complete," RED reported. "Additionally, I have uncovered data indicating the existence of 6 more facilities identical to this one, each housing nuclear warheads." 6 more. His eyes widened. "Correct. I am transferring their coordinates to your HUD. Each facility appears to be operational and connected to Hydra's overarching network." Hank's mind raced. Destroying one missile was no longer enough. If he didn't act, millions more lives would be at risk. "We're taking them all down. Let's get to work." Throughout the night, Hank infiltrated each facility with precision. Using the backdoor installed in the first server, he disabled security protocols and bypassed biometric locks. His suit's cloaking and shrinking capabilities made him virtually undetectable, allowing him to move freely through each base. He reprogrammed the warheads at each facility, redirecting their targeting systems to Hydra's known bases. The sabotage mechanisms embedded in the missiles were meticulously hidden within layers of code, ensuring that even Hydra's most skilled engineers would struggle to uncover them. As Hank completed his work at the final facility, exhaustion began to set in. His suit's power reserves were running low, and his body ached from hours of relentless effort. Still, he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that Janet's life and countless others depended on him. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had done it. The warheads were sabotaged, and their targets were redirected to Hydra's strongholds. Janet's mission could proceed without the looming threat of nuclear devastation. Back in his lab, Hank powered down his suit and removed the helmet. His body felt heavy, every muscle protesting after the night's ordeal. He sank into a chair, staring at the screen displaying the coordinates of the sabotaged facilities. 6 bases, 6 missiles, he muttered. Hydra won't know what hit them. Red chimed in. The sabotage mechanisms are secure. However, I recommend monitoring Hydra's communications for any signs of suspicion. Agreed, Hank said. He leaned back, exhaustion finally overtaking him. Despite the toll, he felt a sense of accomplishment. For the first time in years, he had struck a decisive blow against Hydra and protected the woman he loved. As he closed his eyes, his thoughts turned to the anonymous ally who had provided the initial intel. Whoever they were, they had given him a chance to fight back. Thank you. Leave some reviews and power stones as usual. If you like my work, you can support me on greater than www.patreon.com/excalibursk. Read over 17 advanced chapters, no double billing. Next chapter. Ultimate Iron Man. Excalibur_XC.